work with him, and that there's more bipartisan spirit across the aisle with John Thune as the Senate Majority Leader.
Well, to that point, and Lisa, considering you were just talking about a Washington that's going to be much redder, there hasn't always been friendly feelings only between Senator Thune and the president-elect, even though Thune has tried to make nice with Trump more recently. And I just wonder if this actually does signal that not everything Donald Trump wants to accomplish in the U.S. Senate or with the U.S. Senate's say-so is going to be able to get done easily.
You know, I'd like to think that that was the case, Kaylee, but I think that we're looking at a time when John Thune is going to want to have the Senate be effective and make laws and make action happen here in Washington, D.C., and that is going to require a great amount of cooperation with the White House and with the House of Representatives. And so as much as John Thune has very much been a creature of the Senate for some time, he's also someone who wants to get things done. And so I think that you're going to see that perhaps his disposition as it relates to being in this leadership position looks a lot more like Mitch McConnell's leadership, whether it means he's going to move legislation in a way that makes good sense, or he's going to work with the conference in the sense that he knows that he doesn't just have unilateral control over how the Senate will operate. He will have to work with members of that MAGA bastion and in the Senate itself in order to get things done. So it's going to have to be a very flexible position for John Thune, regardless of how he's behaved in the past.
Adam, we had a conversation earlier this hour with Representative Mark Molinaro of New York. He lost his election last week. In fact, we just found out, in the last 24 hours. He'll be back, I suspect, as we've discussed the possibility of him running for Elise Stefanik's open seat. But he favors a stopgap funding measure that would go through late into next year, September, to kind of clear the decks, let Donald Trump do what he's got to do to enact the agenda. How likely is something like that, knowing the allergy the Freedom Caucus would have to that idea, never mind defense hawks who see that as a budget cut for the Pentagon?
I think you're going to see some really hard, it's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of members of Congress. I think they're going to want to put their stamp on, and you rightly pointed out, defense spending in particular. If it's kept flat, that's as much as a sequester, as we talked a little bit about, in the past hour. It's a hard choice, and I think you're also not going to have a whole lot of Democrats willing to give a whole lot of votes to Speaker Mike Johnson as he tries to move this through. So there is a crowded landscape, no question, in the next Congress, right? They've got to try to extend they're going to try to extend all of the Trump tax cuts.
I'm going to cut you off there because we are just seeing Senator John Thune, the newly elected incoming Senate Majority Leader, walking up to the podium on Capitol Hill for what will be a news conference here. So let's listen into that if we can.
New day in the United States Senate, and it's a new day in America. The American people have loudly rejected the failed policies of the Biden-Harris-Schumer agenda. And this Republican team is united. We are on one team. We are excited to reclaim the majority and to get to work with our colleagues in the House to enact President Trump's agenda. We have a mandate from the American people, a mandate not only to clean up the mess left by the Biden-Harris-Schumer agenda, but also to deliver on President Trump's priorities. We will make sure that the president and his team have the tools and the support that they need to enforce border security laws and to remove the violent criminals who are wreaking havoc in every one of our states. We will work to make America prosperous again by streamlining the bureaucratic machine and overturning costly Biden-Harris regulations. And we will work to restore American energy dominance, not just our energy security, but energy dominance, which will lower costs and bolster our national security. I'm excited to get to work with this team right away, and I want to thank my colleagues who placed their faith in me to serve as leader, and to those who were supporting another candidate. I promise to be a leader who serves the entire Republican conference. We'll have an ambitious agenda, and we'll take each and every Republican working together to be successful. With that, I want to turn things over to Senator John Barrasso, the newly elected Republican whip.
Thank you. On election night, America saw the remaking of the Republican Party for the better. This election was about the answering to the question of, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And the American people said no. Only 1 in 4 Americans thought that the country was heading in the right direction. And you've seen the Republican Party grow in terms of hardworking middle-class families, in terms of minorities, in terms of young people, in terms of families struggling to get by. In the last 3 weeks before the election, I was all over the country with President Trump, with J.D. Vance, as well as a number of our Senate candidates. One of the stories that stuck with me was a woman in Michigan who talked about the fact that she was embarrassed to let her husband know that she had to go to the local food bank in order to get by. Republicans listened to those stories. Democrats were focused on President Trump. Republicans were focused on the needs of the American people, people who wanted to get prices down, wanted to secure the border, wanted us to unleash American energy, people who wanted to make America look and be strong once again around the world. That's what the Republicans listened to, that's what we're responding to, and we are now working together to make sure we can put America back on track.
The newly elected Republican Conference Chair is the Senator from Arkansas, Senator Tom Cotton.
Thank you, Senator Thune. I'm looking forward to working with Senator Thune and the rest of this leadership team. I'm very grateful for the confidence that my peers placed in me.
Senator Tom Cotton, along with the Republican leaders newly elected in the U.S. Senate. John Thune, of course, opening there. We wanted to hear from the man who's going to replace Mitch McConnell. He was just elected in a secret ballot a short time ago. Also, John Barrasso elected the next Senate Republican whip. We just heard from him. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube, you also notice Shelley Moore Capito, next GOP Senate Policy Chair, and James Lankford off to the side there, next Senate GOP Policy Vice Chair. Important to note that James Lankford is part of this new Senate leadership even after the border and immigration bill that he helped to negotiate went down in flames last year after Donald Trump told members to turn away from it. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio on a very busy and important day in Washington. Not only the arrival of Donald Trump, he was meeting earlier with members of the Republican-led House. He will meet with Republican senators later, having had a 2-hour-long meeting with Joe Biden in the Oval Office. Lisa Camuso-Miller is still with us as part of our panel, of course, Republican strategist and former RNC communications director. Lisa, we'd love to hear a couple of the questions and answers that come out of this conversation, but just your thoughts, having seen John Thune on the job here, essentially in front of the Ohio clock, interfacing with reporters. Is he the right man for the job?
Absolutely, Joe. This is a great leader for the Senate. And look, you heard the words from him and from Senator Barrasso about how they intend to work together with the House leadership and with the full conference of the Senate, not just the small faction that they maybe perhaps they want to represent the entire Senate. They want to do the right work. But Joe, there was also some words in there that we should listen to, and that is that they want to also work to advance the elected president's agenda. And that to me tells us that they are going to do everything they can to try to advance change and do the things that the president wants to see happen in this new administration. And so that to me is going to be a signal that they are going to work together with the House, they're going to work at the White House, and they're going to get the hard work done, which really does have to get done. I mean, there is a ton of things that the Senate has got to make happen over the course of the next couple of months in order to make the government work well and continue to advance. So to me, that's an indication that they are excited about the opportunity. John Thune is definitely a consensus builder. He's going to work together with the entire, not just the conference, but also the full Senate in order to get change and to make things happen for the new president. So that is an indication to me that things are going to be led well by John Thune, and it's a great day for the U.S. Senate.
Well, one of the things we heard from Senator Thune, Lisa, right at the very top of his remarks was the idea that Americans had made it clear by giving Republicans this mandate that they were tired of the agenda pursued by not just Biden, not just Harris, but also Schumer was mentioned there. And I wonder how you think the across-the-aisle relationship is going to work between the leaders of what will be the majority and Democrats now in the minority.
Oh, I mean, Kaylee, I will tell you this. I mean, it's not easy to be in the minority, but the one thing that they do, R's or D's, regardless of who's in the minority, is they make mischief, right? So that's exactly what we're going to see. That was definitely a shot across the bow to Senator Schumer to let him know that John Thune was up for the fight and looking forward to that fight. But also, too, I will say this, that the Democrats are going to do whatever they can in order to speak up and speak out from the minority to let the Republicans know that they're not going to go along quietly, that they are going to stand and fight for the principles that they believe are the ones that they need to be fighting for.
Lisa Camuso Miller. Lisa, thank you so much for the insights, joining us for breaking news today. Host of the Friday Reporter podcast, Republican strategist and former RNC communications director. Lisa, thank you so much. We'll keep tabs on that conversation taking place in the Senate. As we turn to one of our other major stories, would have been a lead story on any other day, CPI Day, and a bit of a sigh of relief here in Washington with data that hit the tape essentially matching expectations. There was some concern this could come in hot and change plans by the Federal Reserve. We're joined right now by Anna Wong, Bloomberg Economics chief U.S. economist, with us here in Washington. Anna, what's your thought on the numbers today and what it means for the Fed going forward?
Yeah, I thought the number came in not too hot, not too cold, exactly what everybody predicted, and mapped into the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, the core PCE deflator. We think the number is looking like 0.24% for October, which won't do anything to discourage the Fed from cutting rates in December.
All right, Anna Wong of Bloomberg Economics, thank you so much. Sit tight, as we do want to go back now to Capitol Hill, where the new Republican leadership just elected is holding a news conference answering questions from the press. Senator John Thune just saying he will do everything to process Trump's nominees quickly, and he's still speaking now. Let's listen.
Move quickly.
Will the legislative filibuster remain unchanged under your tenure?
Yes.
How do you intend to balance maintaining the independence of the Senate with passing the president-elect's agenda?
Well, I mean, the Senate, as you know, is by the founders' design, a place where the minority has a voice in our process, and we will do the job that the founders intended us to do in the United States Senate, and that the American people intend us to do. And that, right now, after this mandate election coming out of the American people, is to work with this president on an agenda that unwinds a lot of the damage of the Biden-Harris-Schumer agenda and puts in place new policies that will move our country forward in a different direction.
There you have it, short and sweet. Maybe that'll be the way it's done now in Washington with John Thune in charge of the U.S. Senate. That is your new Republican leader, and in the case of this next Senate session, Majority Leader John Thune. Taking some questions there, Kaylee. We'll do everything to process Trump nominees quickly. That is, of course, of great importance right now, having had Donald Trump call for recess appointments if necessary, starting to think that will not be with the red sweep on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, Senator Thune also saying that he does expect Democrats will be cooperating with Trump's Republican nominees or selected nominees. I guess we'll see to the extent that that cooperation actually materializes. And also interesting to see him say there in very short, direct terms about the filibuster.
Yep.
It will remain unchanged.
That's right.
In the next Congress.
That was a real question.
Yeah.
And, on the House side, we also have questions about rules there with the motion to vacate and some other procedural motions that changed when Kevin McCarthy became Speaker. Those leadership elections, for lack of a better word, will take place a bit later on today.
And of course, once we have news on that front, we will bring it to you as we consider the fact that leadership is going to be instrumental in both chambers in advancing the agenda of Donald Trump. As we heard Senator Thune there, he does want to ensure that Trump has the tools and support needed for that agenda. And on things like tax policy, sure, you need Congress to go along with you. On other policies, the president is able to act with a little bit more authority, like, say, on tariffs.
I think that you're reaching to the right place here, which is something that we want to talk about in an important conversation with Nazak Nakaktar, National Security Practice Group lead at Wiley Rein here in Washington, former Department of Commerce Assistant Secretary and Undersecretary. Great to see you at the table. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Your concerns now, maybe none, about this train rolling down the tracks, because Donald Trump just stopped by the White House. The next time he's there, I suspect he'll be the president of the United States.
Absolutely. He's made no mistakes that there's lots of economic distortions that he's going to take on that have impaired the U.S.'s ability to produce, has had downward impacts on jobs, productivity, innovation, corporate profits, right, GDP. And so he has made clear that he is going to pursue tariff policies primarily to correct for those distortions.
Well, so let's talk about what he's really said about tariffs. He suggested 10 to 20% blanket on all imports. He suggested numbers of 60% plus on Chinese goods, perhaps 100% or more on certain goods like cars coming out of Mexico. How realistic are those figures, or do you expect in reality they will be much lower?
So it's going to be really based on industry by industry. But I want to address the global tariff issue because I hear this question constantly. And this isn't really a matter of picking fights with our allies, because that's just not what anybody is in the business to do. This is really recognizing the fact that China's industrial policies, China's overcapacity has distorted global prices when you think about critical minerals, when you think about autos, when you think about semiconductors, when you think about steel, aluminum, the list goes on. These are materials that go into a lot of manufactured goods. And when we are overflowed in the United States by cheap, distortedly priced goods because of the overcapacity has depressed global prices, we're losing jobs, we're losing industry output. We've got to introduce tariffs globally to correct for those distortions.
The big conversation, or I guess argument here in Washington, has been whether the money from tariffs would be enough to offset tax cuts, for instance, when you start considering lack of revenues potentially in a Trump administration. We don't talk much about retribution. What would be the answer to all of these tariffs from other countries, starting with China?
Yeah, I mean, I think without question, what I found, having previously served in the Trump administration, is that when we have articulated to the EU, for example, the reason for our tariff policies, right? We do have an issue with steel and aluminum overcapacity. The European producers who are not selling in their home markets and have been displaced from the global markets and now are shifting to the United States, they actually tend to understand what we're doing. And furthermore, when we have imposed tariffs to correct for these distortions, our allies were then inundated with the Chinese overcapacity, and then they invoked safeguard measures to protect their industries too from those distortions. So I think that once we engage with allies and articulate the reasons why we're doing this, they'll either not retaliate or they will take the corrective measures they need that will allow us to remove the tariffs because they've addressed those distortions in their market. We've done that before. I think we're going to expect to see that again.
But what would you say to those who view this mechanism for correcting those distortions as effectively just raising the price of everything because importers are still going to have to pay these levies? Is that what is necessary? Inflate prices in order to correct this?
That is a great question. So in the last administration, when we imposed those tariffs on the Chinese goods and when we imposed the tariffs on steel and aluminum goods, the U.S. International Trade Commission, it's a quasi-government body, bipartisan basis, conducted a study about 2 years ago and found that those tariffs had zero inflationary effect and at most infinitesimal.
And more targeted. We're not talking about the global tariffs which you're discussing.
Right. And so there's a couple of things that's worth underscoring. We're not looking at just price increases in isolation. It's really important for the economy to be healthy to correct for those distortions in the prices. That gives you long-term economic growth, stability, and those price increases that may be somewhat will be offset by rises in wages, corporate productive output, et cetera. So I would expect that those moderate tariffs would translate into healthy economic gains for the United States. On the China side, President Trump has underscored significant tariffs, even with those tariffs on the Mexican industries, right? It's where China has been behind those. We've noticed that China tends to, up to a certain point, China tends to absorb those tariffs. And the reason it doesn't translate those tariffs into price increases is because China doesn't want to displace itself from the market. And if those tariffs gets too high, China then abandons the U.S. market. But we see very few instances of actually the pass-through on the China side.
Was it the right thing for the Biden administration to continue with the Trump tariffs that have been in place? This has become the new normal.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just the continuation of the Trump tariffs. President Trump, the Trump administration imposed those tariffs as a countermeasure, a legally authorized countermeasure to address China's IP theft. And as long as China's IP theft continues and it imposes an economic cost to the U.S. economy of $50 billion a year, absolutely those tariff measures are appropriate. They're legally authorized. Plus, what else are we going to do to compel the Chinese government to change its acts, policies, and practices?
Well, so when we consider other ways in which to compel them, it's not just tariffs this administration has pursued, but export controls as well, making it harder for China to develop strategic technologies. Have those been effective, or should we expect this incoming administration to go harder on that, to crack down more?
I think very much harder. I think there's been a growing recognition. I am really glad that Congress and folks in the industry and in the think tank community have learned, taken the time to educate themselves about export controls, because I think the growing recognition has been the small yard, high fence approach isn't working. We need to expand it with respect to China. I think there's going to be a significant movement, which I wholeheartedly support, to deregulate with respect to allies and really increase those guardrails with respect to countries of concern. And I think the Trump administration most certainly will move in that direction.
Just quickly, we have 30 seconds left here. Should Robert Lighthizer reprise his role as USTR in this incoming administration? Would you advocate for that? I think Robert Lighthizer is doing the nation a service by lending his expertise to President Trump on all things trade and trade national security nexus. I would be glad for him to continue in any capacity he and President Trump see fit. All right, Nazak, thank you so much for joining us. Nazak Nakakhtar is National Security Practice Group Lead at Wiley Ryan and former Department of Commerce Assistant Secretary and Undersecretary during the Trump administration. Thank you for being here with us on the early edition of Balance of Power, but we have much more coming up on the late edition. It's been a busy day in Washington, Joe. You said that right. We'll have a lot more on the transition and on leadership elections today. We'll have more info on what's happening in the House. We already know the Senate. John Thune will replace Mitch McConnell. Meet us back here at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody, live on radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. This is Bloomberg Business Week for this Wednesday, November 13th. I was out for a little bit. Anything going on?
She is back. Carol Masser is back. We are very glad to have you back, Carol. Welcome back.
It's great to come back. I'm just going to say, wear your masks, everybody, because there's a lot of stuff floating around out there. Having said that, our focus on this Wednesday, investors' bets on Fed rates again next week. This, as that latest CPI report, bam, right on the money in terms of what the expectations were. So we're going to walk you through it. And we've got a special guest actually commenting on that.
Yeah, one Fed Bank president weighing in on inflation, jobs, and more. We're going to hear from Neil Kashkari in just a few minutes.
Looking forward to that, see what he has to say. Plus Donald Trump landing in D.C., meetings galore as he continues to fill out his administration. So we're going to have an update. He is moving fast and furiously.
Okay, on that, someone else moving fast and furiously is none other than Elon Musk. And he's got a new project. He's the co-head of the Department of Government Efficiency. I'm going to just say this.
Doge?
If they want to be efficient, why do they have two heads instead of one head?
Bam! You're on fire
I don't
today.
know. I don't know.
Not so, right? A little redundancy going on there?
I don't know, maybe.
All right, a lot to talk about on that one. Also, we're going to get into, in the next 60 minutes, Apple's smart home push. And I got to say, no easy segue here. The New York area wildfires and the threat that they highlight, there's a reason why this is maybe on a different scale. All wildfires, not so good, but we'll get into that in just a moment.
All right, we got a jam-packed hour right here on Bloomberg Business Week. All that and more coming up. First up, though, a check on the day's traded top business stories. Here's Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much, Tim and Carol. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all pushing higher. Potentially, we could see yet another record on the S&P. It would be number 52 this year. Right now, right to the numbers at 6,004. Record territory on the S&P, up 20. A gain right now of 0.3%. The Dow pushing higher as well, up 135, up 0.3%. NASDAQ also at a record, up 65 right now, up by about 0.3%. Stocks gaining on bets that the Fed will slash rates again next month after in-line inflation data. And, of course, our Michael McKee is going to have a whole lot more coming up in just a moment. 10-year, 4.45% on this CPI Wednesday. 2-year at 4.27%. Gold down $16 the ounce, a drop now 760. Bitcoin was trading briefly above 93,000. Right now, Bitcoin 92,765. Advanced Micro Devices, AMD, shedding about 1,000 jobs, all part of an effort to refocus on newer markets like AI chips. Today, we've got Advanced Micro Devices down 2%, NVIDIA lower by 0.5%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, got it. Charlie Pellet, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week. Well, the world's biggest bond market boosted bets that the Fed will indeed slash rates again next month after inline inflation data. Shorter-dated treasuries outperforming. You saw that yield on 2-year notes dropping from the highest since July. Swap traders boosted to about 80%, maybe even more. The probability that the Fed will cut rates again on December 18th. Bottom line, it's a different trade than it was a couple days ago.
Yeah, it certainly is. That's the backdrop for Bloomberg's conversation with Federal Reserve at Bank of Minneapolis President Neil Kashkari. Leading that chat, Bloomberg News international economics and policy correspondent Michael McKee, who joins us here in the Bloomberg Business Week studio. Mike, first up, the CPI print today in line, as Carol mentioned, with Wall Street estimates. As you dug into the details, anything in there that stood out?
I think the fact that there were many categories that did see price increases, and some of the ones that have been problems before are problems again, like used cars. And housing is still not going down. It actually went up in price. The two areas that we did see some improvement in were food, up just 0.1%, the same as last month, and gasoline, which was down, and we all know that. The other thing that stood out to me was I'm sure Kamala Harris wishes this report had come out before the presidential election because the price of eggs went down 6.7%. And she'd been criticized heavily for the price of eggs.
I don't know if that would have made a difference, Mike.
I don't think the election came down to just that. But I see what you're doing. Well, wait a minute. So when it comes to inflation, I do feel like, we're hearing some mixed messages or some, you read a lot of stories on the Bloomberg that there are people concerned about inflation reigniting, and especially thinking about a Trump administration and its pro-growth policies?
Well, there's two things to watch. One is that what you're talking about there with the Trump administration and the tariffs and tax policies. St. Louis Fed President Alberto Musalem was just asked about those, and he said, I can't comment on anything that the new administration is going to do, but if you look at a textbook, it will tell you that tariffs raise prices and can create inflation. And Neil Kashkari had roughly the same views today. So the Fed is going to be watching that. But the thing that has really got, for the moment, Wall Street's attention and some economists' attention is we've been making progress on inflation, but are we going to be stuck where we are with headline inflation at about 2.4%? Not 2%, and certainly core inflation well above that right now on a CPI basis, 3.3%. Now, those numbers are lower for the PCE that the Fed uses for its target, but it's still a question of, have we stalled out? And would that keep the Fed from cutting rates further because they need to keep the pressure on to keep pushing inflation lower?
Hey, we're going to talk about your conversation with Neil Kashkari a little more in just a few minutes, but I want you to weigh in on this Department of Government Efficiency that's getting a lot of attention right now. Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy are going to be co-heads of this department. Musk coming out on the X platform saying he wants this like running counter of how your tax dollars are wasted. Although previous presidencies and previous administrations haven't called this Doge, this has been tried before.
Dogecoins didn't exist.
They didn't exist
earlier, and
this has been
I suspect this acronym comes from maybe a commercial point of view on Elon Musk's side. But this is definitely not new. You go back to Theodore Roosevelt had a commission proposing new authority, followed by William Howard Taft, who also had a commission on government efficiency that actually proposed and was enacted the first presidential budget. Presidents didn't submit budgets before, and so presidents were kind of in the driver's seat until the 1974 Budget Act created Congress's responsibility to pass a budget, which they never do. So, you can put that on the list. But you go all the way up through basically the George H.W. Bush administration, and literally Dwight Eisenhower had one, Franklin Roosevelt had two, while he had 1.5 because Harry Truman took over the other half. And there was a commission under Hoover, there was a commission under Coolidge. These commissions just get appointed by presidents, and they all promise the same thing. We're going to make government work better for the American people. We're going to cut regulations. We're going to streamline activity. And they all come up with, several hundred ideas, and many of them get adopted, and yet here we are again. So you wonder how much success they can actually have.
Yeah, I guess so, right? Like it's a huge task. I think a lot of people talk about, though, inefficiencies in government. So you do wonder.
But it's not just getting rid of these so-called bureaucrats. It's not just firing people, because that's actually a very small portion.
Well, that's a different effort too on the part of the Trump administration. He wants to be able to fire government officials who aren't loyal to him, and so that's this whole Schedule F issue that's going to come up, where he tries to move these people from protected civil service jobs into fire at will jobs.
But you do wonder what programs ultimately get cut, right?
Exactly.
And that's the thing, whether it's Medicare, whether it's Social Security.
The most recent, Barack Obama.
Which I think voters actually voted on.
Barack Obama tried to remake the Commerce Department and separate out some things from there, and Congress said no.
All right, so TBD, right? Wait and see what happens here. Let's go back to Neil Kashkari, president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. You did talk to him earlier. Let's just share with everybody some of the information that came out of the interview that Mike did with the surveillance team earlier today.
I'm not seeing a lot of upside risk yet. We don't know what's going to get enacted. I'm not seeing a lot of upside risk that inflation is going to take off from here. The bigger risk that I'd be concerned about on the inflation front is just if we're landing at around the 2.5% level instead of back down to 2% level. I think that those risks existed before the election, and I think that there continues to be uncertainty now, and we need to just take our time, let the data come to us, and let that guide us.
All right, so Neil Kashkari speaking with Mike and the surveillance team earlier this morning on radio and TV. So there is more data before the next Fed meeting, right? So a rate move, not a guarantee, despite what traders are saying. We know this can bounce around a little bit.
Yeah, I wouldn't put a lot of stock in what you're seeing in the futures markets right now, because we do get a lot of data. We get another CPI report, we get a PCE inflation report, we get a couple of retail sales reports, and we get the jobs report for the month of November. And all those things will weigh on the administration. But you see Kashkari saying what we were just talking about, that his worry is that we get stuck. And that might call for the Fed to stay in one place. Musalam, who was mentioned, was just speaking, said exactly the same thing. Gradual cuts if inflation keeps falling is the way he put it. And Jeffrey Schmidt from Kansas City also saying there's uncertainty about how far rates should fall because there's uncertainty about where inflation is going. And I think you're going to hear this pretty much from every Fed official over the next couple of weeks. We don't know, but don't count on it one way or another. Don't rule it out, but don't count on it.
It's the way it goes. All right, Michael McKee, thank you so much. International economics and policy correspondent here at Bloomberg News. Catch his full conversation with Neil Kashkari. Check it out on the Bloomberg. All right, everybody. So from the economy and Fed policy to those who will be helping to shape some of the new policy initiatives in the Trump administration, that's exactly where we go right now.
This as the president-elect continues to name names for top cabinet posts and other advisory roles, and as Mr. Trump goes to Washington, meeting today with President Biden and top members of the GOP. Back with our Washington Roundup, Bloomberg News political reporter Tyler Kendall live for us at the White House. Tyler, President Biden and President-elect Trump meeting earlier today at the White House. That meeting wrapping up. What do we know about that, what they talked about, how it went down?
Yeah, hey, Tim. So White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre coming out just moments ago calling this meeting substantive, saying that there was this exchange of ideas and that they hit on national security, domestic policies, as well as a to-do list for Congress in the coming months, including averting a government shutdown when funding runs out on December 20th, as well as passing some more supplemental disaster relief funding for Americans. But the press secretary also honed in on this idea that the meeting was largely symbolic, right? It was to ensure this peaceful transfer of power. Important to point out that 4 years ago, then President Trump did not extend the same tradition to then President-elect Biden. However, the two did appear cordial today in brief remarks off the top, both committing to making this transition as smooth as possible. I'd also quickly add that as we are getting these headlines from the White House press briefing, it does appear that the two did speak about Ukraine and supplemental assistance to Ukraine. This confirms some of our earlier speculations as we were looking at clues on what the two could be talking about. Because as we look at what President Biden is pushing for in these final months of his administration, we know that his national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, has said that they will push the Trump transition team to make sure that that security assistance for Ukraine plays out. But of course, he has now Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, one of the staunchest opponents of Ukraine aid in his Oval Office. So that's one of the storylines that we're going to be covering closely.
Yeah, I'm glad Tyler brought up the idea of what happened 4 years ago.
Very different.
At the White House. Extremely different. I mean, think about where we were just a week after the election 4 years ago. The two actually never met at the White House 4 years ago. President Obama did extend that same courtesy to then President-elect Trump 8 years ago, and he visited the White House.
Yeah, right? Like, so it wasn't kind of business as usual, certainly last time around. Hey, one thing we also want to ask you, Tyler, is Republicans, for the first time in 18 years, elected someone other than Mitch McConnell to lead them today. That person is South Dakota Senator John Thune. Tell us a little bit about those developments coming out of D.C. as well.
Yeah, definitely, Carol. So not necessarily a surprise, Senator John Thune, one of the top contenders for this race against another John, Senator John Cornyn, a Republican from Texas. Also, Senator Rick Scott, a Republican from Florida, who appeared to be backed by some of the more conservative MAGA Republicans for that spot. Thune ultimately ended up winning in a second round ballot. He's been the #2 in the Senate, a staunch ally of Senator Mitch McConnell, who, as you mentioned, is ending a historic 18 run as the party's leadership. But he is going to be absolutely critical in remarks after winning. He said that he will work with now President-elect Donald Trump, because as you both know, working with the Senate is going to be so critical for this incoming president, both for his agenda, but also for some of his cabinet confirmation. There are two areas I'm watching for when it comes to Senator Thune. One is his position on tariffs. He's previously criticized Trump's proposed tariff across the board policy, warning about inflationary effects. And the second is, again, to bring it back to this idea of Ukraine aid, considering this was a particular area of tension with McConnell and some of his more conservative members of the party. So those are two of the areas I'm watching to see how those shake out as his term begins.
The president-elect didn't really come out and endorse anybody for that leadership position in the Senate, Tyler, but Elon Musk certainly did, and there were a lot of Trump allies who were saying Rick Scott is the person to choose. How should we look at that fact that Scott didn't get picked as sort of a rebuke of, or at least some resistance to, what Trump wants in the new Senate?
Right. Well, I would focus on Senator Thune's track record in the Senate. He has won the admiration and respect from many of his colleagues, particularly since he has served as this number two to McConnell for so long. And he had been campaigning for this early and often. Meanwhile, Senator Rick Scott hadn't launched this bid. So we knew, for many months that Thune was going to be vying for this position. But Rick Scott, for example, was in a tight Senate race down in Florida and then kind of launched this sort of bid. It's going to be absolutely critical for the Trump administration to try to keep a coalition together. We had Congressman Brendan Boyle on Balance of Power yesterday. He's a Democrat from Pennsylvania. When we asked him about the future of governing with this incoming White House, he said that he's watching for if the Republicans can keep their conference in order, since the most recent years have showed us that infighting in the Republican Party has really hurt getting Republican legislation through. I would just quickly add that this morning, when Trump did go to the Hill, it did appear that he backed House Speaker Mike Johnson. That's going to be another critical ally for getting Republican legislation and agenda items over the finish line.
And then, of course, there is Elon and Vivek, which was, I feel like when we read in this morning, Tyler, that was the story that was kind of top of mind in terms of President-elect Trump's appointments or, additional advisory council, if you will. The president does seem to be moving, though, very fast and furious when it comes to these appointments and these nominees.
Yep, definitely. And particularly on this Department of Government Efficiency, I would just say quickly, there are two big outstanding questions here, right? One, how is this going to work in practice? Trump has said that it will be outside of the government. So would that be some sort of a panel that works with the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, to give its recommendations? And then second, how is it going to do its work? You were speaking about this earlier with Mike McKee. The federal government spent $6.75 trillion last fiscal year. Musk came out in that Madison Square Garden speech just ahead of the election saying that he wants to cut $2 trillion. But the vast majority of government spending is healthcare, Social Security, defense, and veterans benefits. So there is this concern that some of those more popular but also politically fraught initiatives like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid could be at risk. But also, as you mentioned, Musk has pledged to make this a more transparent process.
I do have one last question, 30 seconds. Going back to what Tim mentioned about John Thune, I mean, it does look like he is willing to go to battle with Donald Trump. Is he there to carry out the president-elect's mandate, or is he willing to kind of go to toe-to-toe with him? Just quickly.
Right. So in his remarks afterwards, he did say that he was willing to work with him. I think you're referencing a prior rift after 2021, after January 6th, and making sure that that election was certified in the way that it should have been. But John Thune has said that he will be there for the rank and file, even adding some of Donald Trump's priorities in his speech afterwards, including border funding and immigration.
All right, good stuff. Hey, listen, Tyler, thank you so much. In and around D.C., Tyler Kendall. She is Bloomberg News political reporter joining us there from the White House. Coming up next, we're going to talk about the richest man in the world.
Yeah, he's about to treat the U.S. government as if it were a money-losing social network.
Wait, who could we be talking about?
Yeah, we're talking about Elon Musk. We got Max Chafkin joining us in just a few minutes. On today's Big Take, all about the next big project for the world's wealthiest man. You're listening to and watching Bloomberg Business Week.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long. Here at Bloomberg, we have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ. They're all advancing right now. Could see another record number 52 of the year on the S&P 500 index, holding right around 6,000, just under right now, up 1459.98, up by about 0.2%. The Dow up 116, up 0.3%, while NASDAQ is up 24, a gain of 0.1%. 10-year on this CPI Wednesday, 4.44%. The 2-year, 4.28%. Gold down $15 the ounce to $25.83, a decline of 0.6%. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 0.4%, $68.41 for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin now at 91,133, was trading briefly above 93,000. Bitcoin now up by 3.2%. Spirit Airlines said to be closing in on a deal with creditors that would restructure its crushing debt load in bankruptcy court after discussions for a tie-up with rival Frontier Group Holdings fell apart. Right now, we have got shares of Spirit plunging 58%, Frontier down 1.7%, and JetBlue, which tried to acquire Spirit, up by 10.3%. Recapping S&P right at 6,000, up 0.3%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thanks so much for that update, Charlie. Do appreciate it. Some breaking news. Republicans will maintain control of the U.S. House. NBC and CNN are reporting, giving President-elect Donald Trump GOP majorities in both chambers of Congress. Republicans have controlled the House since 2023, and Democrats would have needed a net gain of 4 seats to retake the majority. The Senate flipped to Republican control.
All right, folks, we're staying with news out of D.C. In the days after the election, Donald Trump and Elon Musk, well, they seem to be riding the world's most intense contact high. So writes our own Max Chafkin. Musk is effectively camped out with Trump's inner circle at Mar-a-Lago. He shows up in family photos. He joins Trump's calls with world leaders. Perhaps that's what you get when you spend over $100 million, $132 million at least, into the president-elect's campaign. So let's get to it. This is the Bloomberg Big Take story, deemed by our editors as a must-read story. It is reported out by Bloomberg's Max Chafkin and Dana Hull. Max is Bloomberg Businessweek correspondent, contributor to the Elon Inc. podcast. Max is also author of The Contrarian, Peter Thiel, and Silicon Valley's Pursuit of Power. Max joining us here in studio. Yeah, I mean, we've all been asking kind of what is Elon going to do in this job? What can he do? And what does it mean kind of as being part of this Trump inner circle?
Well, I mean, you know, last night Trump announced something that he had teased repeatedly on the campaign trail, something that Musk had talked about, this idea that Musk would be an advisor in the streamlining of government. And there's even a catchy name for this. This is the Department of Government Efficiency. It's not a department in the sort of normal sense, and it's also unclear like how efficient is this thing going to be when Elon Musk has a co-chair, Vivek Ramaswamy. That said,
do you know what Tim's been saying? Go ahead.
I've been saying that. It's like it's supposed to be efficient. Why are there 2 of them?
All right, this is a joke that Democrats have pointed out and critics are gonna seize on. And I think the challenge here is that many of the things that Elon Musk has talked about wanting to do, cutting $2 trillion from the federal budget, or even if you start talking about some of these very specific things that he personally thinks is kind of dumb or useless, all of that's going to be politically difficult. When you're talking about gigantic cuts, $2 trillion, that's going to mean Congress, it's going to mean hard choices about important federal programs like Social Security that lots and lots of Republicans, you know, that majority in the House is going to be very, very narrow. The midterm is going to be
it's going to mean, are you looking at the midterms?
And so again, that's going to be hard. But when you even talk about the sort of smaller things like, you know, some defense thing, you know, a lot of this stuff is politically charged, right? You have senators, congresspeople in various states who care about the jobs in those states. Right. And Trump is going to need to govern, and he's going to need Republicans in the House and Senate to do that, even though Republicans control those branches. But you know, seeing the selection of John Thune as Speaker again, that's kind of a bit of a rebuke to Elon and kind of the hard right part of this coalition. They had wanted Rick Scott, so there's going to be a lot of challenges here. Of course, there are ways that Elon Musk can get paid. Even so,
one thing we should note is Elon actually accompanied the president-elect to Washington this morning. He was with lawmakers earlier, too. They gave him a standing ovation in addition to giving the president-elect a standing ovation. So certainly gives an idea how he's seen in the Republican Party right now. Max, the China part of Elon Musk's story, I keep coming back to, because he's got this very close relationship that I wonder if it could be, in the words of like Jeff Bezos, a complexifier when it comes to Elon Musk's relationship with Donald Trump, because he wants to do business in China, and he wants to do business easily in China.
It's not just that he wants to do business in China. He really needs to do business in China. Tesla, unless there is a dramatic change in strategy, Tesla needs its China business. There's a massive factory. It's the world's largest market for electric vehicles. Tesla is trying really hard to compete there, and Elon Musk has made that a big part of his strategy. Now, I think two things are possible. One is if tensions between the U.S. and China were to heat up further, there are ways that Elon Musk could de-emphasize his reliance on China. The biggest one would be, focusing more on robo-taxis, which he's starting to do. The other thing is, Donald Trump ran as a peacemaker, a negotiator. Yes, he's going to, put tariffs, he says. But remember, the last time, lots of companies got carve-outs, were able to negotiate their own, basically ways to avoid paying those tariffs. So you could imagine Elon Musk trying to find, get some exceptions carved out for important industrial companies such as, Tesla Motors, a company that he, owns a huge stake in. And the other thing is, compared to Joe Biden, I think Trump is arguably not as, despite the fact that the rhetoric is very hawkish, Biden was also quite hawkish on China. So I'm not sure that this represents such a huge complexifier, but though it is certainly going to be a challenge. And it's also, of course, an opportunity for political opponents of Donald Trump on both the right and the left to seize on, because you can talk tough on China, but then when one of your partners, has this enormous Chinese factory, has a good close relationship with the Chinese Communist Party, that's gonna lead to criticism.
I keep thinking about conflicts of interest in this administration. Here you have Elon advising Donald Trump in terms of the efficiency of government. You have a company that does a lot, has business contracts, right, SpaceX, with the government. You talked about how, Elon can get paid. I mean, his stock is already up 30% from the election. I mean, it just seems kind of complicated in terms of the connections here.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, if you were watching the campaign, what you understand is the conflicts of interest are the point. I mean, Trump talked about that as an advantage. That was sold as an advantage, and it's going to continue to be sold as an advantage. Elon Musk, he's not just some egghead. He really understands business. In fact, he runs a couple of important businesses. Trump talked about, on the campaign trail, just essentially like ordering up rockets from Elon Musk. So I think that they believe, Donald Trump, his advisors, Elon Musk, that basically voters and the Republican Party are not going to mind that he's that important. But I think that really remains to be seen. And what happened during the last Trump presidency is that the controversy started to bubble up, right? And then it became harder and harder for people who were kind of in Elon Musk's position to stay in that inner circle. And that's exactly what happened to Elon Musk, by the way, in 2017. Amid all this controversy, it was after the sort of Muslim bans and Trump left the Paris Climate Accords, Elon Musk backed away. He had been on another advisory panel. So I think that is one thing. What's different this time around, and I think what's going to put pressure on Donald Trump and actually put pressure on moderating forces within the Republican Party, is that Elon has all this money that he's going to spend on politics. Yesterday, he was tweeting that he's going to play in the midterm, including the primaries. And if you read between the lines, what he's saying is, if you don't go along with my agenda, Senate Republicans, Congress people, I am ready to dump a huge quantity of money into a primary. Are you ready for a primary challenge? And I think that is going to be his leverage. And we'll see if it actually works. And I think whether it works partly depends on what Donald Trump decides to do. Does he run as this kind of ultra MAGA guy that he presented, or does he try to move to the center?
But I also wonder if Elon Musk loses interest in this in a few months or in a few years.
I mean, that is I think there's a conventional wisdom that says
he's got a lot on his plate.
He's got a attention span that drifts easily. He's got all these companies. He spends hours a day playing video games. He's got a lot going on. So if this started
he's got a lot of kids.
Yeah, he's got a lot of kids. Many interests.
A lot of wives, a lot of former wives.
What I'll say is though, this is a really great opportunity for him as a government contractor, as somebody who does a lot of things having to do with the government to have influence. So I think he's going to ride this train as long as it'll go. And I think he does have levers that he can pull that will make it harder for Donald Trump to push him away than, say, it was to be able to push away these other sort of business leaders who got close to Trump the last time around. He's not, he has a lot more ways to influence Trump than, say, Anthony Scaramucci, who famously lasted 10 days as the press secretary.
Max, one thing I'm curious about, all that spending that Elon Musk did on this campaign, I mean, it wasn't just a case of just throwing money. I mean, he was involved in creating, hiring companies, getting people to do it. It was a whole new different way of campaigning for a candidate.
Yes, super unusual. So you're talking about really big money. You said 132 million. I think when all said and done, it's going to be closer to 200 million. So kind of up there with the biggest contributions of any donor. And then this approach that is really different from any other mega donor. The Sheldon Adelson was just writing big checks and staying behind the scenes. That's kind of the model. Elon Musk, as you said, front and center. He made Donald Trump and sort of Trumpism the editorial focus of X, his social network. He was on the campaign trail. He's tweeting nonstop. He brings things to this that are unquantifiable and that are probably worth more than the 200 million he put in.
Hey, one thing I want to talk about is the platform X. And, we talked in the 2 years that he's owned it, there have been valuation write-downs by Fidelity, for example. How should we be looking at the valuation of X, or how should we be looking at X as sort of a platform arm of the Republican Party, or communications arm?
Well, it's both a business and it's a loss leader media arm for the Elon Inc. conglomerate, right? Those are the two things, those are the two functions it serves. As a business, it hasn't gone super well. As you said, Fidelity has written down the value massively. Elon Musk, essentially taking it over, decided he didn't care about advertising. He decided that, he was going to be okay with not having a vibrant advertising business. He literally told advertisers to F off, from the stage of a major conference. And what he's done is sort of accepted that this is going to be a less successful business, but try to maintain its influence and maybe even intensify it. And I'd argue in that way, it's been a huge success. It's been a huge success as a political play, and even as a community. It may not be super vibrant in the way it was before. There are a lot of journalists who are, currently leaving to go to Blue Sky or Threads or these competing social networks. They're growing very quickly. But among conservatives, among that kind of base that elected Donald Trump, they are on X. This is where they are getting their news right now.
All right, going to leave it there. Hey, Max, as always, thank you. Max Chafkin, columnist at Bloomberg Business Week. Just a reminder, a headline that just crossed moments ago, Republicans will maintain control of the U.S. House. NBC and CNN networks, they are reporting that out, giving Donald Trump GOP majorities in both chambers of the U.S. Congress. More on that story when we come back on Business Week.
2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow and the S&P pushing higher. NASDAQ now in the red. NASDAQ down 21. Drop there of 0.1%. S&P up 3. That is a gain of just under 0.1%, while the Dow's up 49, higher now by 0.1%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares slumping now by 0.4%. 10-year at 4.44%. CPI Wednesday with a 2-year 4.27%. Gold down $15 the ounce, 25.83, down 0.6%. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.4%, 68.36 per barrel of WTI. Bitcoin did trade briefly above 93,000, right now at 90,185, up 2.1%. After earnings, Kava Group shares up 1.2%. After earnings, Spotify, it reported third quarter growth in subscribers and profit margins. Spotify surging 11.4%. Instacart posted strong revenue in the third quarter, a sign of resilience in its core grocery delivery business, but it forecast adjusted earnings in the current period that fell short of analyst expectations. Instacart right now down 13.6%. Recapping, S&P at 59.87, up 3 points, up just under 0.1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. So just to recap, about 20 minutes ago, we got reports, Republicans have held on to their narrow majority in the U.S. House of Representatives, giving Donald Trump and his party unified control of the elected branches of government and limiting potential curbs on the incoming president's power. That Republican sweep called by CNN and NBC News really sharply diminishing any hope for Democrats to curtail Trump's sway over next year's big fight over trillions of dollars in expiring tax provisions. There's a lot at stake here, Tim.
Yeah, we got with us Bloomberg Balance of Power co-host Joe Matthew. He joins us from our Washington, D.C. bureau. Joe, largely expected, given that the lead that Republicans had, but what does this do over the next 2 years for Trump's ability to pass what he campaigned on?
It paves the road to do a lot. This, again, to your point, is not a huge surprise. The timing is interesting, though, as members of the House get together today in Washington to choose their leadership. And we already had a visit to that very same group today from Donald Trump himself, of course, in Washington for the day, not only meeting with Joe Biden in the Oval Office, but the first stop he made was to a hotel where he met with the Republican conference. And it was a big cheerleading squad. Elon Musk was there, too, by the way. Didn't do a lot of talking, but apparently a lot of waving, we understand. They're feeling pretty good about things here. And knowing that the Senate is Republican-led with a wider majority this time around is going to give him a chance to do a lot of things when it comes to extending the Trump tax cuts. For instance, that'll be probably issue number one. We do have questions, though, about the lame duck and what's going to happen in this session. There's a funding deadline on December 20th. So before they get a chance to actually take control, that's going to have to be dealt with as well. Republicans have a very thin majority right now in the House. They're going to have a pretty similarly sized one here with about 218 seats, at least it looks like, as of this moment.
Should we assume that the Republicans are just going to get their way? And I moderated a panel this morning with Andrew Ullman. He was the former deputy director of the White House National Economic Council. He was in the White House for about 3.5 years working on economic policy. He said, you're still going to see members of Congress on both sides of the aisle working together. You understand inside the Beltway. Do you agree, Joe, that you will see collaboration from both sides?
Well, they'll have to be on some things in the House, certainly. Mike Johnson is going to need Democrats to get some things done, just like we saw in this session of Congress with such a razor-thin majority. You're talking about 4 or 5 seats here. You're going to need the other party to get some things done. There's a little bit less pressure in the Senate with 53 Republican seats there now. But look, Donald Trump is asking for some big stuff, and there will be a big throwdown over extending or making permanent the Trump tax cuts first and foremost. We're going to have a major fiscal cliff budget fight later on in the year when it comes time to raise the debt ceiling. All of that stuff will be difficult. But now that we can actually call this a Republican sweep and a trifecta, the Trump agenda is very much on track to be passed once we get into January and Donald Trump takes office.
Hey, Joe, we know many Democrats licking their wounds right now, given the outcome of last week's election. I think back to a piece I read earlier this week in the New York Times about Susie Wiles going out to Las Vegas and essentially telling donors out there that they've got a 2-year window to get things done, essentially saying, hey, 2 years from now, we could lose big when it comes to midterms. Is there a silver lining for Democrats here that they can be sort of the insurgent party in the next election?
Well, it's an easier job, that's for sure. You know, Hakeem Jeffries can do a lot of things to slow down the agenda, to get in the news, to try to prop up certain members when the time comes. That's all part of being in the minority. And look, history shows us that the pendulum swings. After a big sweep like this, it will be a much more favorable map, first of all, in the Senate for Democrats in the midterms, and then just the general sense of exhaustion that tends to follow something like this. When you see a president coming into town and taking Congress with him in this particular case, that can be pretty favorable to the minority party in the midterm elections. That's just what history shows. But of course, history hasn't had a lot to do with what's been going on lately here in Washington, D.C. We'll see what kind of momentum the MAGA agenda can get.
All right, Bloomberg Balance of Power co-host Joe Matthew in our D.C. bureau. Catch Joe and Kayleigh Lyons coming your way once again at 5 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio and Television. All right, from the nation's capital to our backyard right here in New York City, the wildfires that are burning throughout the Northeast, across New York and New Jersey. Tim, small compared with many of the wildfires that regularly devastate the U.S. West, but the blazes in the Northeast are increasing risks in one of the most densely populated parts of the country. That's what makes this different.
Yeah, with that story here in studio is Bloomberg News weather reporter Lauren Rosenthal. Lauren, we talked a little bit about the fires in Brooklyn's Prospect Park over the weekend.
That's crazy.
Oh, it's totally crazy. And the blanket of smoke that was over Manhattan and much of Brooklyn over the weekend. To what extent does the weather have to do with the recent uptick in fires that we've seen?
Yeah, this was an incredibly dry summer, and it was the driest October on record for New York City's Central Park and for many other locations across the Northeast. You know, the landscape is just incredibly dry. There are a lot of, you know, leaves down this late in the fall. There's a lot of fire fuel there, so any spark, a stray cigarette, an errant barbecue, you know, the land is really primed to burn.
And there's just so many people. There's so much stuff here in the New York Metro. Tell us why that distinguishes any kind of wildfires out west or other. Terrible. But there is something different here.
Yeah, I mean, there is a ton of incredibly valuable real estate up and down the Northeast corridor. You know, a lot of times when we see large wildfires in California that prompt, you know, major firefighting efforts, they tend to be in sparsely populated mountain canyons. So Prospect Park, which abuts an incredibly wealthy neighborhood, you know, in Brooklyn, that's a very different picture and really ups the urgency for firefighters. They were out there, you know, there were dozens of personnel, drones on site trying to spot the hot spots and get the fire put out.
Yeah, I mean, my first thought when I heard that was happening was like, okay, FDNY has the tools and resources to battle blazes in skyscrapers, but do they have what it takes to take on a wildfire?
Yeah, I mean, you know, New York's Department of Environmental Conservation, that's a state agency, you know, they train for and deal with wildfire risks all the time, but dealing with, you know, a recent blaze, there are 11 wildfires, I think, burning across New York State right now, according to New York's governor. They did lose a young member of their firefighting crew, I believe, last week. So, yeah, it's a really challenging environment to work in, and you know, a great point that an urban wildfire very different from you know, a blaze up in the Adirondacks.
Well, you know, and when we get into the nitty-gritty details, you write, you know, that some of the older trees also that we've got here just, you know, kind of suck the ground dry. And if you've already got dry ground, it just kind of exacerbates the situation.
Yeah, the Northeast is a really interesting landscape. A lot of it was cleared over a century ago for agriculture. You know, there's a lot of old growth forests left where, as you point out, yeah, these aging trees, they haven't been cleared by persistent burns on and off like we see in California. So they do draw a lot of moisture out of the soil and you just dry out that land. Yeah.
You're a weather reporter, but
Sure.
You know, and so you're not like looking at the radar each and every day. But I'm wondering, are we going to?
She probably is.
Is there going to be some rain though in the Northeast that will help clear this up a little bit?
There is the potential for some high pressure ridging in the next few days. That's not good news for rainfall. Temperatures will be a little bit above average for this time of year. We'll get up into the 60s in New York City again this week. So not necessarily what you want to see at this dry juncture in the fall.
Not a good thing. All right, Lauren, thank you so much. Bloomberg News weather reporter Lauren Rosenthal joining us in studio. Still to come, hey Alexa, hey Google, Apple is coming for you. We'll explain that story when we come back on Business Week.
listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. That's Carol Messer. She is back. I'm Tim Stenivek here in the Bloomberg Business Week studios in New York. And what would you like to hear about on Bloomberg Radio? Help make shows like ours even better by taking our Bloomberg audience survey. Visit youtube.com/Bloomberg Podcasts and click the link in our profile or community section to take the survey. It's hosted by our partners over at Material. Fill it out now at youtube.com/Bloomberg Podcast.
I'm always surveying people. That my Uber driver today gave me some feedback about what he would like to hear. So maybe I'll get into that a little bit later on. Okay. I got to say, we are very much an Apple home. We've got a few Google Home devices. I feel like my husband is just waiting for Apple to offer up something. And as Bloomberg News Chief Technology Correspondent Mark Gurman reports, sounds like, Tim, it is coming. Mark joins us from LA. Mark, good to have you here. Great story, so much in this story. So what may be coming from Apple and when on the smart home front?
So the smart home is Apple's next big thing. It's actually funny. 10 years ago, or a little over 10 years ago, Apple introduced HomeKit. This was a framework for the iPhone to interact with smart home accessories, sprinklers, dishwashers, laundry machines, but also things like lights and locks and TVs and whatnot. And it was kind of stagnant for a while. Then they released a HomeKit app so you can control these things from an application on your iPhone and your iPad. Eventually brought it to the Mac. Then they took it to another level, right? They started introducing things like the HomePod and making the Apple TV part of it. But the home approach really never took off. But now they're hoping to change that. In March, they're going to announce a new device. It's a Home Hub. It's about a 6-inch display. It looks like two iPhones side by side, so it's square. It has a FaceTime camera on it. And you'll basically be able to do anything from your wall or from your nightstand or your kitchen table, things like video conferencing, intercomming, reviewing security footage, controlling your lights, controlling your media playback on your speakers and TVs throughout the home. So a central place just for home stuff. And it's really similar to an iPad, right? But something that's going to be a bit cheaper and dedicated to home use cases.
Okay, that's what I wanted to hit on, and that's exactly where I want to go. I was actually in a home over the weekend, and a friend of mine, and he's got basically an iPad mini embedded in every single wall to control all that stuff already. Why not just go with an iPad and instead of creating something completely new?
Yeah, well, obviously they're trying to create new sources of revenue, right? So they don't want people who have an iPad to use an iPad to control their homes. They want people to use their iPads for other stuff and then buy an additional device to control their homes, right? And then obviously you can get wall attachments like your friend. They have them all over Amazon. But also the cool thing there is that this will have a wall attachment specific to this device, something Apple designed, Apple made, that you can buy if you're in the Apple ecosystem. So that's really the leg up there. And there's going to be a new operating system and user interface optimized for home use cases. Obviously, the iPad has the Home app, but you can't build the device around those home use cases, whereas this is going to have a dedicated home screen for your home controls. And the other thing here is that this is going to have Apple Intelligence, so this is going to be built from the ground up for Apple Intelligence. Apple said that about the iPhone. Complete lie. Here, it's actually the truth. This is a device that's going to be controlled entirely by your voice.
And I bought a new iPhone. Darn. Anyway.
Yes, using a feature called App Intents. App Intents means you'll be able to have finite, very specific control over actions on the device. So you'll be able to manipulate the whole thing, telling it, scroll there, do this, do that, right? Something you can't really do on your phone today or your iPad today. So it's going to be very Siri, Apple Intelligence, AI focused. Big presence on home control, but the big features are communication, home control, security, and Siri.
Does Amazon and Google have to be worried?
I don't think so. I mean, they've been in this game for 5 to 7 years. They have the Nest Hub, the Nest Hub Max. The Nest Hub's only $100. The Nest Hub Max is $230, and it's going to have much better speakers and a bigger display than the Apple device, and it's going to be cheaper. Amazon last year launched the Amazon launched the Echo Hub, which is a very similar dedicated control panel for home use cases. Several years ago, they launched the Echo Show, which was the first Echo with the display. They have an Echo Show 15 now that can actually be pinned to your wall as well. So both of those parties have been in the game. And all of these companies are really reliant on each other at this point when it comes to the smart home. That's because there's a new framework called Matter, which makes it so all smart home appliances, regardless if they're developed for Apple, Amazon, or Google, they can work on each other's platforms. So that's going to be a cool component of this too.
What's the price on this puppy?
I think it's going to be a few $100. I think it's going to be between $200 and $400. I would say it's probably going to be closer to the $300 range. I don't have a final price point. We're still about 4, 5, 6 months away from this going on sale. But it's not going to be cheap in context of the existing home display market. There's going to be a premium like there always is for Apple products. But compared to something like an iPad, it's going to be a little bit less, right? The iPad mini now, I believe, is $500. So this is probably going to be $100 to $200 less than that iPad mini.
Mark, 10 seconds. Is it going to follow us around like that old Facebook device?
No, but they're working on a subsequent model, probably about $1,000, that will have a robotic limb that can follow you around the display itself.
Kind of cool.
Look at that.
That version will also have a personality, an AI personality, designed to be a companion in your workspace, but that's a couple years off.
Oh,
what?
Okay.
I already have a companion in my workplace. His name is Tim Stanovic.
Sometimes he gets a little cranky, though.
He does get a little cranky. Or you just feed him, and then he's just fine. Mark Gurman, thank you so much. Chief Technology Correspondent, Bloomberg News, out there in L.A. Quick headline. President-elect Donald Trump confirms he will name Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. So that's his nominee. That's just crossing the Bloomberg terminal.
If you're continuing with us on Bloomberg TV, we got former Assistant Secretary at the Department of Commerce. That's next.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by O'Reilly Auto Parts.
I'm Cammie McCormick. CBS News projects Republicans have won control of the House. And Nicole Killian reports from Capitol Hill that will work very much in Donald Trump's favor.
Certainly in terms of enacting a policy agenda, having this trifecta will also help him move swiftly, as well as both chambers to enact whatever policy priorities they have going forward.
Senate Republicans voted in a new majority later today. South Dakota's John Thune will replace Mitch McConnell. President Biden hosted Trump at the White House today to talk about the transition.
A transition that's so smooth, it'll be as smooth as it can get, and I very much appreciate that, Jim.
Correspondent Nancy Cordes reports it's a sharp turnaround from the last transition.
The fact that President Trump 4 years ago didn't invite Biden to the White House, that was just one of the many ways in which the typical transition process did not take place, and it really put the Biden team on the back foot.
It was a leak that stunned national security officials. A man who worked for the U.S. government has been charged with leaking classified information about Israel's plans to attack Iran. CBS's Robert Ligari reports he was arrested in Cambodia.
Federal prosecutors charged Asif Rahman, an employee of the U.S. government who held one of the highest levels of security clearance, with 2 counts of illegally transmitting the classified information. 2 sources familiar with the investigation and court records revealed the documents leaked by Rahman dealt with Israel's possible plans for a strike. They surfaced online in October.
Record-setting dry conditions are prompting more concerns in the eastern U.S. Meteorologist Grant Gilmore.
It's crazy how dry it is all across the Northeast. And we do have those red flag warnings in effect really for New England today. It does include portions of New York, but also up into Massachusetts, Boston underneath these red flag warnings today.
A professional basketball coach has suffered a health scare, as Matt Piper reports.
The San Antonio Spurs say coach Greg Popovich suffered a stroke on November 2nd. Turns out the stroke happened at the arena in San Antonio prior to the team's win over the Timberwolves that day. While the 75-year-old is expected to make a full recovery, the team says there is no timeline on when he'll return to the sidelines.
The latest inflation report shows a slight uptick, as Jason Brooks reports.
The government's consumer price index rose 2.6% last month from a year earlier, while the core rate factoring out food and gas rose 3.3%, both numbers stronger than in September, although both right in line with analyst estimates.
And on Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrials are up more than 30 points. This is CBS News.
restrictions, message and data rates may apply.
Are you eating your greens? The healthiest vegetable of them all may surprise you. CBS's Deborah Rodriguez has that.
Apologies to Popeye. The CDC has deemed not spinach, but watercress the healthiest veggie of them all. It scores a perfect 100 on the center's long-standing powerhouse ranking, thanks to its nutrient-dense makeup. Chinese cabbage is a close second, followed by chard, beet greens, and finally Popeye's favorite, spinach. Key ingredients in PFV, powerhouse fruits and vegetables, include potassium, fiber, protein, calcium, iron, and an array of vitamins. Deborah Rodriguez, CBS News.
The Toy Hall of Fame has inducted its new class of honorees, among them the Little Pony and Transformer action figures. This year's finalists also included the Stick Horse. I'm Cammie McCormick, CBS News.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody. We are just 60 minutes away from the closing bell.
Who I hear?
It's me with about 50% of my voice, 60% of my
Hey,
voice. It's coming back.
You are 100% here.
I am 100% here.
And we're grateful. We're happy to have you back.
I'm happy to be back. There's just so much going on. Even in today, you've seen kind of markets bounce around on some of the headlines. We've got some inflation data, but we're off our best levels of the session. We'll get into the trade in just a moment.
Hey, up ahead over the next couple of hours, you know the MAGA movement, right?
Heard of it.
Okay, what about the MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again?
Hearing about that, too.
Okay, the idea is it's going to clean up U.S. food production. It's gained support, but RFK Jr.'s controversial views on vaccines and fluoride are clouding the message.
Yeah, looking forward to talking about that. We're also going to be joined by the former Assistant Secretary and Undersecretary at the Department of Commerce. That was under President Trump, first time around. She's been in touch with the transition team. She's going to weigh in on trade policy come January. That is a big deal with this new administration.
And with Elon so closely tied to Trump right now, what is the future of hydrogen-powered vehicles?
Should we call them twins? I don't think we can do that yet.
Like, no. Not even like the Danny DeVito, Arnold Schwarzenegger movie.
No.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Remember that movie? 1990s, I think? Okay.
Long time.
We posed that question to Andy Marsh. He's the CEO of the hydrogen company Plug Power.
All right, first up, though, let's get to the market day and your top business stories. Here is Charlie Pell.
Hi, thank you very much indeed. 54 minutes to go until that closing bell clangs on Wall Street. The Dow higher. We've got the S&P now swinging between gains and losses. Earlier in the session, we were on track for our 52nd record of the year, but right now we got the S&P up barely, up now by half a point. NASDAQ is slumping 43, down by 0.2%. 10-year on the CPI Wednesday, 4.45%. The 2-year, 4.28%. Gold down $23 the ounce to $25.75, down 0.9%. West Texas Intermediate crude calling that flat on the day, 68.14. Bitcoin, what a story there today. We did see a move above 93,000 for the first time ever. Right now, 90,205 on Bitcoin, up by 2.1%. As for the overall market backdrop, Amanda Agati is Chief Investment Officer for Asset Management at PNC Bank.
We're in a little bit of a euphoric period, I think, because we ended up getting a much more binary outcome than what anyone was really pricing for. And so there is some recalibration that's happening here in the market. Not a lot's going to get done, though. But I think this hype around we're going to have things happen very quickly in the new year is enough to kind of keep this rally going. We're going to have to get right down to business in the new year, though. So that's where the rubber is going to meet the road.
And she was interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Surveillance. And by the way, you can hear a whole lot more of that conversation on the Surveillance podcast. Download it wherever you get your podcasts. Briefly, VW has raised investment plans in Rivian Automotive by $800 million. Rivian surging on that news, up 12.7%. ADRs of Volkswagen down 2.4%. EV rival Tesla down 0.9%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thanks so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. Well, Make America Great Again has long been a signature phrase at Donald Trump rally speeches. And his recent offshoot, Make America Healthy Again, or MAHA, is now spreading on social media as fitness influencers and parents embrace a push by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to clean up U.S. food production. We've got with us Antonia Mufarech, a Bloomberg News health reporter. She joins us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. So let's take a step back here and just explain the MAHA movement here, because I think there's some nuance to this, because Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he's known as this anti-vaxxer. He said some things that many doctors and public health experts argue is actually dangerous. But there's a lot in his platform that I think a lot of people could get behind. What did you find?
Yeah, so basically MAHA, this movement, aims to get toxins out of U.S. food, or basically like the U.S. food production. And what I've seen is that there are many influencers and mothers who are really supporting these new movements because they want toxins removed out of their foods and out of their children's food. So for example, I was talking to some influencers and they told me that at first they were really in support of RFK Jr., but then when he joined, when he showed his support for Trump, they were Team Trump as well. So in a way, a lot of people have been drawn to this idea of removing toxins out of the U.S. food supply.
I mean, like, turn on my mic, that would be helpful. This is what happens when you're away for a week, homesick. No, but what's, all right, the mic is on. What's interesting is I'm in. I mean, you know, we have had a fair amount of conversations about people trying to disrupt the food supply and how it's done. It's not easy because it's really kind of concentrated in some really big growers or big companies. You know, how difficult a task is this going to be?
Yeah, I mean, that is what I think a lot of people are pushing for. One of the influencers I spoke, for example, Vanny Hari, known as the Food Babe, she told me that...
I want to be like the Food Babe. All right, go ahead, go ahead. It's our new world.
She's a mom herself,
Yeah.
and she told me that she's been fighting for this notion to remove food dyes and food like toxins out of specifically children's meals like cereal. And this is something that she's been really fighting for a few years now. And she, like, seeing RFK Jr. really supporting this made her excited that Washington might be able to hold these companies accountable.
It's strange, though, because on the one hand, you have, you know, what RFK Jr. has talked about, like the idea of exercising every day, not eating ultra-processed foods. And then on the other hand, you have Donald Trump, who loves McDonald's, went and worked at a McDonald's during his campaign. When he was in the White House last, I remember this picture of him where he invited this college team, a championship team, and he got them all McDonald's. Like, this is not a guy who, you know, who's a
do what I say, not what I do.
He's talked about not exercising.
Yeah.
So it's like these are kind of strange bedfellows to me.
Yeah.
It's not really a question. It's just a statement.
Yeah.
It is. But it's interesting to see these folks who are so interested and concerned about health be attracted to a candidate president-elect who hasn't necessarily shared the same message as this guy. He's aligned himself.
Well, and I think, Antonia, you know, we're spending so much time talking about the Trump mandate and what's going to be, you know, top of his priorities. And we know whether it's things like immigration or whether it's, you know, tariffs and so on and so forth, that you do wonder, he's going to appoint someone to do things, but you do wonder how much, if it's not kind of his own strategy or priority, you do wonder how much attention it ultimately will get within the administration. I mean, again, that kind of goes back to, like, how easy is this to change?
I think it's something that a lot of people have struggled to change. I know all these influencers have told me that they've been raising this issue for a really long time, and that they believe that maybe for the first time there's someone who's talking about this.
What do these influencers tell you? Like, when you said that they, you know, have been trying to work on this, do they get to talk to the players in the industry, or are they not even getting any progress? What did they tell you?
They told me that they've reached out to some companies. They've definitely done, like, a lot of on their social media, specifically just speaking out about it, going on some videos becoming viral, especially the one on Vanny Hari speaking about all the dangers of food coloring, because something that she's saying is that in the U.S., they are using some kind of food coloring that is banned in other countries, like in other countries in Europe. So, but I think they haven't gotten a lot of feedback. She told me that, for example, Kellogg didn't necessarily reach out to her or reply, so she's just been very vocal about it, and I know other influencers who I spoke to have been as well, but they feel like this is the first time someone in Washington is really paying attention to this topic. And
A
this
bigger
is
voice, right?
Exactly. And this is what drove them to really support him.
But it still does remain to be seen what ultimate role RFK Jr. will have in the second Trump administration, because he does have a lot of views that are looked at as anti-science, like this whole anti-vaxxer idea.
Very controversial.
Incredibly controversial, to say the least. And I think a lot of public health experts would push back and say stuff that's just factually incorrect.
Right. And you do wonder, whether it's the NIH, like how, does research get impacted and so on and so forth. Like you do wonder what his impact will be ultimately, how much he can get done. I was thinking about when you were talking about food, and I had a daughter who was overseas in Europe and just would constantly talk to us about the food and how fresh it looked and how much better it tasted. And it was just kind of interesting, and what a contrast, she said, to here in the United States.
Come to Brooklyn, Carol.
Listen, I have farmers
when Prospect Park isn't burning, we'll get you some.
But you're saying in the farmers markets and so on and so forth. But it was just interesting, some of what was saying,
Okay, Antonia, I'm wondering about the influencers you spoke to and the actual power that they have. Because when we use the term influencer, it's such a broad term.
Yeah.
We talk like Joe Rogan is an influencer.
Yeah.
He's got a podcast that reaches tens of millions of people.
Yeah.
How influential are these folks you spoke to?
So some of them have around 2 million followers on Instagram, and they have other channels like YouTube and TikTok, and they're mostly wellness influencers, I would say, and some comedians as well, who have been vocal about this.
Jillian Michaels too, who's long-time workout advocate. We all know her videos from back in the day. She's been outspoken about this stuff too.
Yeah, she was actually on a video with RFK Jr. on the MAHA movement, so she's definitely been vocal about this as well.
So kind of what's the next step for you in kind of watching this space and what his impact will be? And I'm just curious how you think about it.
I think it's just very interesting. Also, listening to what health experts have to say and what are the actions. As you've said, there's no specific role right now, so I think it'll be interesting to see what role RFK Jr. will be given, and
if any,
and
right.
Yeah, and what health experts, as you said, they've already raised some concerns about his views on drinking raw milk as well, and anti-vaccine. So it'll just be interesting to see if he'll be given a role, what will it be, and
fluoride in drinking water is another one that
I know, which we've all grown up, just that of course you want fluoride in your drinking water. I also wonder too, if companies are going to come back and say, listen, it's going to cost, all right, we'll do it, but it's going to cost you a lot more money. The products are going to go up, and so whether or not there'll be interest to do that. What?
I don't know. There's also this element to choosing the food to eat and the food to give your kids, right? The whole idea of personal choice. And historically, Republicans have really said, it's your choice if you want to do that or not. So the idea of requiring companies to do that, again, the whole MAGA movement is completely different from traditional Republicans. We've seen that, but there's that tension there.
I also think about when we talk about organic or something, and people are like, well, but not everybody can necessarily afford what some of these food choices cost. So
that is a good point.
There's another piece to it. Listen, this is going to be an interesting story to watch. So I'm glad you could kind of cue us up on this one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Antonia, thanks so much for joining us. That's Antonia Mufarech, Bloomberg News health reporter. Carol, some breaking news also coming from the transition team. President-elect Donald Trump has selected former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence. This is according to a statement. That just crossing. So we're continuing to see the names come fast and furious for the new administration.
I'm just blown away at how quickly all of these names are coming down. All right, folks, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week, and this is Bloomberg Radio.
Thank you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118
It's 3:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ barely all in the green right now. And just 39 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. S&P right now up 12, higher by 0.2%. The Dow up 110, up by about 0.3%. NASDAQ now in the red, down half a point. Little change, perhaps the key takeaway at this report. We've got the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares slumping now by 0.4%. 10-year at 4.45% with a 2-year 4.28%. Gold down $22 the ounce, a decline of 0.9%, spot at $25.75 the ounce, while West Texas Intermediate crude 68.06 a barrel, down now by 0.1%. Bitcoin at 90,860 earlier in the day. Bitcoin did advance briefly above 93,000. So stocks trading mixed right now. As for the market backdrop, Seema Shah is Chief Global Strategist at Principal Asset Management.
There's all this uncertainty, but I think the one thing that we can say is that the election result and what's coming out from there is just simply reinforcing a narrative that was already in play before the election, which is that of a soft landing. So if we look at earnings, that still looks pretty solid. You know, we talk about deregulation. I mean, that's another positive to throw out there.
Charter Communications has agreed to buy Liberty Broadband in an all-stock transaction. This merger will consolidate two public companies in which cable billionaire John Malone holds significant interest. Right now, we have got Liberty trading lower by 4.8%, Charter up by 4%. Recapping, S&P up 10, up 0.2%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thanks so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. Hey, if you never want to miss a Bloomberg Business Week story, become a subscriber today. You'll unlock deep reporting and analysis from reporters around the world, including unlimited access to Business Week. Check out our offers right now on Bloomberg.com/subscribe now. Carol, I'm taking a look at the most read stories over the last 8 hours. We're continuing to talk about what we're learning about the folks who Trump has named or plans on naming to various positions in his next White House administration. The most read story is about the Fox TV host who has been chosen by Trump to handle the Pentagon.
You're talking about Pete Hegseth, right?
Yeah.
Right, his selection. He's a weekend host. Donald Trump, President-elect Donald Trump, has selected him as Defense Secretary. I mean, as we report out, putting the world's most powerful military in the hands of the least experienced leader it's had in decades. Political and military officials around the world resorted to internet searches for details of the nominee's record. One senior European diplomat said his lack of experience is an encouraging, and a U.S. defense official called it an unusual move to go for someone who had never held a senior position. Typically, you've got folks who have had very high positions in military or were generals. Lloyd Austin, Jim Mattis were both generals. Bob Gates had run the CIA, and they are typically the ones that you've seen either running or being nominated to be defense secretary.
For his part, though, after he graduated from college in 2003, he was commissioned as an infantry captain and served tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. You have Democrat Adam Smith, the House Armed Services Committee ranking Democrat, coming out and saying, quote, "The job of Secretary of Defense should not be an entry-level position. I question President-elect Trump's choice of a television news host to take on this immensely important role." That said, what we are learning is, and we talked about this yesterday with Laura Davison down in Washington, D.C., the theme that ties together pretty much every name that has been announced is a person who has been incredibly loyal to the president-elect over the last 8 years.
Yeah, no doubt about it. There's a common thread among these nominees. As for Hegseth, he has made clear he sees China as a primary strategic concern for the United States. He remarked in one interview that Beijing was, quote, specifically dedicated to defeating the United States of America. We certainly have heard a then President Trump and a President-elect Trump talk about China. And we have also heard about his expectations or intentions in terms of tariffs specifically targeting China. He did it in the first administration. They were carried over. Some continued in the Biden administration, but this would be certainly a ramp up of those efforts. So, you know, we shall see.
He'll have to testify before the Senate Armed Services Committee. It must approve his nomination before it sends it to the full chamber. Remember, Republicans control it 53 to 47, or they will, starting in 2025. J.D. Vance will cast the tiebreaker. So what that means is that 4 Republicans would need to vote against him. So far, though, none have said that they would be willing to break ranks. In fact, Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa, she had been mentioned as a possible Pentagon pick. She said, I think he's going to be a very strong Secretary of Defense.
Yeah, and another issue is we should point out that he was co-host of Fox News Channel's Weekend Morning program. Hegseth has been a fervent supporter of Trump and his views on reforms of the U.S. military to push back on progressive causes such as LGBTQ rights. He's also been a backer of Trump's attempts to do diplomatic deals to resolve global security problems, including a failed attempt to reach an agreement with North Korean Director Kim Jong-un during Trump's first term to dial back Pyongyang's missile and nuclear threat. So
we got some breaking news.
What do we got?
On another appointee, President-elect Trump nominating Matt Gaetz of Florida for the job of Attorney General, which is pretty, kind of leaves me speechless, I'll be honest. That's incredibly surprising. I hadn't seen that name floated. We should remind everybody that Jeff Sessions, who was Attorney General under President Trump in the first administration, did not always see eye to eye with the president-elect. Once again, the president going to somebody who has proven his loyalty to the president-elect.
yeah, this is kind of fascinating. I also do wonder, as he names these different nominees, and what it does to then the composition of the U.S. Congress, right? As he's pulling out members potentially, I do wonder, what that does in terms of kind of the strength, if you will, of the GOP. But you're right, it's an interesting nominee, and we'll have some more coverage on that in just a moment. Meantime.
Yeah, let's take a look at shares of Plug Power, the green hydrogen company. They're higher today, at one point, Carol, by nearly 10%. This after shares fell yesterday, after the company cut its revenue guidance for the full year and missed the average analyst estimate. We've got back with us Andy Marsh, President and CEO over at Plug Power, joining us from Plug's annual symposium event just outside of Albany, New York. Andy, always good to check in with you. Welcome back to the program. First, we got to go there. I'm wondering how you're looking at the Trump administration, the second Trump administration, given that Elon Musk is so close to him, obviously a proponent of EVs. What does having Elon so close to Trump mean for hydrogen and for Plug Power?
Well, Tim, I don't get too excited about this, Tommy. I've been watching political elections since I was a kid in 1968, and things are always extreme at the beginning. I think the real question is, think a little bit about what Exxon CEO said yesterday, where he said that, the Trump administration should be thoughtful about their clean energy policies. And we had 2 analysts here at our Plug Symposium today, one Republican, one Democrat. They'll tell you, I think the feeling across the board is that small nuclear, hydrogen, sustainable aviation fuel with biofuels, are in pretty good shape compared to other technologies. And look, if you look at my electrolyzer business, 95% of it's outside the United States, and that's my biggest growth opportunity. I had one customer who flew 45 hours from Australia to present today. So I don't get too excited about those things.
I will say, though, Andy, there was some disappointment about your forecast. But I do believe, you guys came out and said, you're still making progress. Canaccord Adams, they did lower their price target a little bit on the stock. What can you tell us about the outlook and give us a little bit more insight into how things are going?
Well, I think that if you take a look around the world, I think there's a couple drivers. One, we're working on deals which are, overall for people, $5 to $7 billion type projects. And we were overly optimistic about how fast projects like that could come to fruition. That being said, they're actually paying us to do the work now to prepare to do those deployments. And look, regulations haven't moved as fast anywhere around the world. It's tough to get regulations in place, but they're moving. We see, as I mentioned, great progress in Europe. Actually see progress here in the United States. So, we've also, look, it's been a bit of a haul here, Carol, and we've become a little bit more conservative in how we forecast the future.
Understood, and respect. Andy, one thing though, do you think a Trump administration and any expectations around policies that impact your business will be positive or negative?
That's really an interesting question. One of the items which we've struggled with the IRA is the production tax credit for hydrogen. And, we believe, and we've been pretty clear about it, we think that the regulations that were initially written included concepts of 3 pillars for a hydrogen economy, which was nowhere in the legislation. We think the Trump administration will probably be more in gear with the recent Loper decision by the Supreme Court, and where congressional intent and how it's implemented in regulations will be more aligned. Look, I'm not naive either, too. I don't expect a lot of new programs for hydrogen, but we'll do quite well if the old programs are implemented the way Congress intended.
Hey, Andy, I'm wondering about the Inflation Reduction Act and what that's meant for your business, and to what extent you could see parts of it rolled back, and how that would affect your business when Trump takes office in January.
So, I have a lobbyist who spoke here today at the symposium, who sat on the Republicans' House Ways and Means, runs a tax plan. He does not expect that. He expects the rollback will be on things like offshore wind. And look, I think 80% of what I do is actually done in red districts and red states. I have a large contingent of folks in Houston looking to build a large hydrogen plant in Texas. I have a hydrogen plant operating in Georgia and Tennessee. Most of my customers are in red states. And so, I think Congress still matters. And, I think John Thune being Senate Majority Leader is a sign that, activities won't be extreme one way or another. I think there'll be a balanced approach. Look, I think, as folks mentioned, I think the mantra is all the above, and what we do is all the above. And look, if we don't do it here in the United States, they're going to do it in China, and certainly a Trump administration doesn't want it done in China.
Andy, how much pressure are you feeling from the investment community? I mean, your stock's down about 56% year to date. About 25, almost 1/4% of the float is shorted. It's a $2 stock. I'm just curious what kind of pressure you are feeling from investors at this point.
Yeah, so Plug has 31 analysts. I had 20 of them here today. Actually, the short position is probably larger than that, Carol. It's probably 37%. And I think a lot of folks believe that as we continue making progress, there's a large opportunity for a huge short squeeze. So, I think our investors want to see it happen. I spoke with a lot of them here today.
But you want to be more than a short squeeze, right, to investors. You want to be, to investors, a fundamental play, no?
Yeah, I would say this, Carol. We do want to be a fundamental play, and I think the shorts have had a lot of control of the stock, and if we are a fundamental play, the stock will do just fine.
All right.
Good question.
I guess. Wait, sorry. Can you go ahead?
No, go ahead, Tim. No, please go ahead.
Hey, I want to know about production of hydrogen and how you're able to you do it in a way that's not too energy intensive, because that's one thing that we talk about a lot. When you're actually producing this, a lot of energy is used. So yes, it is sort of, people call it a green solution, but it still uses a lot of energy.
It uses a lot of energy, but it also creates a lot of energy too, Tim. So let me tell you where I think hydrogen will really see, and you're seeing already, is in applications today where hydrogen is used in oil refinery, in concrete manufacturing, in ammonia production. Where it will be used at first is in substitution.
Okay.
And ultimately, what we focus on is improving the efficiency of electrolyzers. And you can get to the point where, you're never going to be at the point where energy in equals energy out, but you can get to a point where it's far superior to even today. It's, if you think about the full life cycle, it's superior to natural gas turbines. I'm not, but that is a big focus of the company.
All right, Andy Marsh, we're going to leave it there. President and CEO over at Plug Power, joining us just outside Albany, New York. Thanks, Andy.
Good to check in with them. Hey, let's get back to a headline that just crossed a moment ago. President-elect Donald Trump nominating Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz for U.S. Attorney General. The president-elect putting this out on his social media platform, Truth Social. Let's get to it with Bloomberg Balance of Power co-host Joe Matthew from our Washington, D.C. bureau. Joe, this was not necessarily on our radar.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's not at all. And this is a remarkable choice. We're talking about an individual here who is under active investigation by the House Ethics Committee. And it's an investigation that widened over the summer. He's accused of trying to obstruct a probe into sexual misconduct and illicit drug use. It is also the individual, and by the way, they have about 25 subpoenas out on that case from what we understand. This is also the individual who helped to dispatch, was singularly responsible, I think we can argue, for helping to dispatch Kevin McCarthy as Speaker of the House. Kevin McCarthy, I can only imagine what he is thinking right now with this news, has gone out of his way to try to get Matt Gaetz unseated in the House unsuccessfully after spending a lot of money in his race in Florida. He just won re-election last week. And yeah, this is not one that was on the bingo card, on the dance card for today, Carol.
Yeah, I was speechless when I saw this name. I'll be honest with you, Joe. It's pretty shocking to see this, given the investigations that he's currently facing. That said, given the Republicans' slim majorities in the House and Senate, is he going to be able to get through the Senate confirmation process?
Boy, just a huge question there. I can't imagine what we're going to learn about Matt Gaetz between now and the timing of that process. He has a lot of enemies in Washington. He has a lot of enemies in Florida, and I can't imagine where this is going to go. It's not the only one that raised some eyebrows today, by the way. Former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard was tapped as essentially the nation's top spy, national defense or national intelligence coordinator. This is another peculiar appointment that is going to be one that is very curious in the way we look at it in Washington, reinforcing the idea that all of these come back to the one issue, and that is loyalty as opposed to experience.
What? Go, Tim.
Well, can you talk a little bit more about Tulsi Gabbard and why she's such a peculiar pick?
Well, look, it gives him an opportunity to say he's got a former Democrat, I guess, in the mix here. But this is a very controversial figure and one that did not get along with the Democratic Party when she was a lawmaker here in Washington, from Hawaii, by the way. She's a veteran. She had a great story to tell, and it, in many ways, was looked at years ago as a potential Democratic leader. But she ran across a lot of members of her own party, having had some dalliances with Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and essentially aligning herself against Democratic causes. That is what caused her to be embraced by Donald Trump.
Joe, help me out here. The approval process. I can't help but wonder, with all of these nominees, will there be some horse trading going on, some sacrificial lambs among the nominees, where Republicans are going to say, we really want this one, and so Democrats, you get this one. Like, will there be that ability for Democrats in the nomination process, the approval process, to do that? And so maybe that's a little bit of potentially what's going on here in some of these
It's a great question.
names.
It'll depend a lot on the news that comes out surrounding some of these nominees, because you better believe the Oppo train's going to start rolling on all of these things, and there's going to be a concerted effort to defeat them in the confirmation process. It is kind of amazing. We have another member of the House, though. I mean, the Republicans don't have that many members to lose. We've already got Lee Zeldin, right? We talked about that yesterday. We've already got Elise Stefanik going to the UN, so we're starting to encroach here. Mike Waltz to join the president in the national security space. I'm not sure how many more they can afford to lose And it's just happening right now, by the way, as Republicans in the House vote on their leadership. Speaker Johnson was endorsed today by Donald Trump. He met with them, and it's time to start talking about committee chairs next. So this is moving pretty quickly.
Joe, remind us how these representatives, these members of Congress, how their seats get filled depending on where they lived. I know where they live. I know in some cases it's a special election, but in the Senate in Florida, for example, with Marco Rubio, if he were to get the Secretary of State position, that would be a Governor DeSantis choice. Like, help us understand how this works.
Yeah, typically when you're in the Senate, you'll see an appointment by the governor like that. In the House, you'll have a special election. And that's why there's some concern. These are not, these are not concerns about the seat going to a Democrat, for instance. They're going to be likely Republicans elected in these Republican-friendly districts, but it takes time. So you could have Mike Johnson with, one arm behind his back for a good 3 or 4 months until they figure this out. I will say that the debate around government funding right now, there's a funding deadline on December 20th, plays into this. There's now an eagerness to extend this deadline by kicking the can to September. So Donald Trump doesn't have to deal with the budget process for some time and can start to enact the agenda. It would also make it easier for the House majority, in this case Republicans, to get some time to get these members back and fill those seats. But this is going to be a huge problem for the Freedom Caucus and for defense hawks who want to see more money going into the Pentagon, not sitting around until next September, waiting around to find out.
All right. So appreciate it. Joe Matthew, thank you so much. Interesting as we continue to hear some of the nominees here for President-elect Donald Trump's cabinet and really key advisors. Bloomberg Balance of Power co-host Joe Matthew from our DC Bureau. Joe and Kaylee Lyons coming back at 5 p.m. Wall Street time right here on Bloomberg.
Hey, we got fewer than 20 minutes to go until the close of trading today. Let's get an update on everything happening in the markets and business news. Here's Charlie Pellet.
Thank you very much. Indeed, the Dow, the S&P higher, NASDAQ swinging between gains and losses, have been trading in record territory earlier in the session. Right now, the S&P at 59.98, close to a record, up 14, up 0.2%. The Dow up 110, up 0.3%. NASDAQ right now up 1 point, and the 10-year 4.44%. The 2-year 4.27%. Gold down $23 the ounce, down 0.9%. West Texas Intermediate crude flat on the day, 68.09 the barrel, and Bitcoin now at 90,767, up by 2.8%. Bitcoin did trade briefly above 93,000. The New York City Council has passed a measure which will ban landlords from passing broker fees to tenants. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
It's
the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, just about 16 minutes left in today's trading session. Bouncing around a little bit more of a muted trade, certainly on the equity side of things. But let's get to it. We did get an inflation read earlier this morning. Back with us is Doug Sioka, CEO and partner at Kavar Capital. They've got about $1.5 billion in assets under management, joining us from his alma mater, Notre Dame. Doug, good to have you back with us. How are you?
Hey, I am great. Thank you for having me on, and great to be back.
Well, it's great to have you here. Nothing's going on. Quiet as could be. The election, the outcome, I don't know. How does it change your thinking about the investment environment and what's to come? Or is it just really too soon to tell? But we are getting a lot on his cabinet, nominees and key advisor nominees. So I don't know if that starts to paint a picture of maybe what's to come.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that certainly helps is we've had 4 years of President Trump before. So, we're going through and experiencing kind of like the old expression of history may not repeat itself, but it often rhymes. So we're having a lot of conversations about like the devilish impact of tariffs and trade war 2.0 and what does this really mean for the yield curve. And I think it's early, right? There are in politics promises versus policy. And somewhere between the two will actually lie the outcome of what will transpire. So yeah, I think, look, the momentum that's in place, that's celebrating what is purported to be very much a free trade, emphasizing low regulation, low tax platform, it likely will be hard to stop that going into year end, which is seasonally pretty strong anyway. But I do think there are going to be a lot of opportunities that emerge without question.
What kind of opportunities?
So right now, I think, more than anything, like we think that's happening in the fixed income markets is really fascinating. I mean, everyone's talking about the yield curve. Oh my God, how can it possibly see like some lift in the long end after the Fed has now cut 75 basis points in 2 consecutive meetings? You realize that this is the third time in the last 5 cut undertakings that a month later, the curve is either flat or a little higher, right? And it makes a ton of sense to us to think about term premium steepens is to reflect the fact that there's an incipient risk of inflation because the Fed is cutting. GOP is still strong. Normalization is validating a labor market that is back in balance. Inflation is under control, as we saw this morning, though not careening lower, and the dollar is strong. So we think this is a very positive transformation away from some pretty steep inversion of normalization where we can actually pick up yield to make little longer loans. So we're really happy what's happening in the fixed income market.
Wait, so what's the specific play then right now?
Yeah, excuse me. I think the play is in the belly of the curve. And I think the play is in credit. And I think the play is going to be, because what happened right in the muni market, which just kept such a bid in those bonds throughout the year, in spite of a really ho-hum performance by the ag, is that, and this is going to be like, this is a mind-boggling idea, right? Local governments and municipalities actually have to balance their budget. So there's a lot of terming out that had taken place. There's not been a lot of paper that's come to market because some of these treasurers in these municipalities exhibited very strong foresight in locking in lower rates for a longer period of time. Corporations not as much, governments not as much. So we're seeing that 5 to 7 year period in the curve very attractive to us. You clip a lot of coupons. Oh, and if you do get a tailwind from consecutive Fed cuts, even if they're not going to be as much or as big as people thought a year ago, that's going to actually give a nice contribution to the total return of yield plus appreciation.
Any inflationary risks when it comes to Trump's agenda? Tariffs, we're going to be speaking about those. We're going to be speaking about those a little later.
Yeah, no question, right? I mean, I think that is an issue. And again, you've got to go back and say, okay, in Trade War 1.0, how much of an impact did that have on CPI? Forget PCE for a sec. Very little, right? So really, if you go back 2018 and 19 during Trade War 1.0, you saw CPI remain pretty stable at almost exactly the Fed targeted 2%. Now, you have to take into consideration the backdrop's a little bit different then, right? You had global demand for manufactured goods was a little bit weaker. Slowing trade had already begun to take place, which is not the case right now. But you got to keep in mind the changing transformation and composition of the U.S. economy. Spending on services right now is 66%, in goods 33%. So much of the tariffs that people are fearful are going to be passed down to a tax consumer. It's just not impacting as much of their pocketbook as it did 3, 5, 7 years ago.
What's going on? It's crazy, right?
It's nuts. I mean, yeah, everything's coming fast and furious. Doug, thanks for joining us. Always good to check in with you. Sorry I was cut a little short. We had a lot of breaking news today.
We did.
Definitely appreciate you taking the time. Doug Sioka, CEO and partner over at Kavar Capital Partners.
All right, folks, just about 10 minutes to go. We're getting ready to count you down to the close on this Wednesday. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stennebeck on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. That's Carol Massar. I'm Tim Stennebeck. And what would you like to hear about on Bloomberg Radio? Help make shows like ours even better by taking our Bloomberg audience survey. Visit youtube.com/Bloomberg Podcast and click the link in our profile or community section to take the survey. It's hosted by our partners over at Material. Fill it out now at youtube.com/Bloomberg Podcasts.
All right, everybody. A lot going on this Wednesday afternoon. I would say, safe to say, out of D.C., probably the story that is certainly front and center right now is that President-elect Donald Trump continuing to fill out his key positions for his administration, second term, said he is nominating Matt Gaetz to be Attorney General, tapping a staunch conservative lawmaker to reshape U.S. law enforcement and carry out his agenda on immigration, crime, and hot-button social issues. Trump has signaled that he will push for a radical transformation of the U.S. Justice Department, which has more than 115,000 employees.
Yeah, I go back to a story, actually, you sent it to me, Carol, by our own Jonathan Tamari over at Bloomberg Industry Group back in June. And this is certainly something that's going to come up in the confirmation process, but a reminder that the House Ethics Committee over the summer released new details of its investigation into Representative Matt Gaetz. It outlined the depth of its inquiry into accusations involving sexual misconduct, drug use, also doing favors for close associates. That panel, evenly split between Democrats and Republicans, said in a statement that's spoken with more than a dozen witnesses, issued 25 subpoenas, and reviewed thousands of pages of documents.
Yeah, and we should point out the committee did add at the time that the accusations do not mean that it has found any ethics violations, that Gaetz has denied wrongdoing, and that is no longer pursuing several allegations, including questions of bribery. But this panel that was split between Dems and Republicans, it also said that other new accusations have arisen during its investigation. So this is kind of sitting out there.
Yeah, reminder, former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has really tussled with Gaetz in the past. I mean, they were physically tussling at the Republican National Convention earlier this year. This unusual statement, though, provided a rare glimpse into the work of a secretive committee that typically only speaks when it has reached significant conclusions or decision points. It was released over the summer. This was a day after Gaetz blasted the investigation on social media and claimed it had been orchestrated by the former Speaker of the House.
You know, when we think about the U.S. Attorney General, so key in terms of what the President-elect Donald Trump will be able to do in terms of carrying out his agenda. So this is really crucial, this position, you know, whether it's from enforcing federal laws to litigating controversial matters. So it's really, really important. It also plays a key role in doling out billions of dollars when it comes to grant funding for immigration enforcement, border security, and policing. So when we talk about Donald Trump's mandate and what he looks to do, we know he's laid it out very clearly. He did on the campaign trail, very much so his priorities, but his Attorney General will be very key in getting all of that done.
I wonder what happens in the confirmation process. What we learn, what comes out, as we heard from Joe Matthew, co-host of Bloomberg Balance of Power a little earlier. You got to know the opposition folks are out there already digging right now to find stuff to talk about at that confirmation process, and to what extent he actually gets through it. That could be a challenge.
Or does it really matter, considering the Republicans are in control of, the legislative branch here? And, I just wonder in terms of the process.
But the Trump team is already meeting resistance, given that Rick Scott was not chosen as Senate Majority Leader.
Yeah. No, it's a fair point. It goes to the question I asked Joe, that I do wonder that Donald Trump is laying out who he wants. Here's my wish list, if you will. And that at some point there's going to be some negotiating about, okay, if you want, between in the nominating process, whether some of that will go on. So I guess time will tell. We'll have to see. But as we said, Joe Matthew of Balance of Power, this was not necessarily on anybody's radar. So it certainly came as a surprise.
Consider me surprised.
You were surprised.
I still am surprised. I think a lot of people are surprised by this pick.
All right, guys. We're going to table that for a moment. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more reporting on the Bloomberg, and we'll bring it to you, no doubt about that. Right now, though, we're watching the markets. Just a few minutes to go. We're heading over to our TV colleagues. Counting you down to the close. The closing bell starting right now.
The Closing Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close, starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic here with Scarlet Food, taking you through the Closing Bell, a global simulcast. It starts right now. Tim Stenovic in the radio booth. Welcome back to Carol Massar as we welcome all of our audiences across all of our platforms, including our partnership with YouTube. Carol Massar, you've been gone for the last couple of days. I don't know if you were interviewing for cabinet positions or something, but you obviously didn't get it, so you're back here.
I told you not to tell anybody.
I know. I put your name in there for Secretary of State, but maybe next year.
Yeah.
No luck,
Look,
Carol.
look at the market, Carol, and you tell me what you see and what you make of the moves over the last few days.
Well, first of all, there was so much enthusiasm, right? I feel like about certainly what's to come, pro-growth policies and so on and so forth. Today, I feel like it's a confused marketplace. I think there's a sigh of relief that inflation didn't come in higher than expected, but I think there's a wary eye by investors about what's to come at this point in terms of the Trump team.
Well, one thing that's not confused in terms of direction at all is Bitcoin, still moving higher, crossing $93,000 per Bitcoin. Yes, another day, another new record high, Scarlett, for the cryptocurrency.
How do you
continued
explain
optimism. I mean, maybe there's going to be a strategic Bitcoin reserve and the government will start buying Bitcoin. Maybe.
Is that like the strategic oil reserve?
Maybe Tim is going to be crypto czar.
But the Bitcoin is invisible.
As long as we're growing the Bitcoin right here in the U.S. Must be U.S. made.
These are all valid questions, and it's not just Bitcoin as part of the Trump trade that continues, right? You also have the U.S. dollar. It's been a relentless rally for the dollar, higher in 5 of the last 6 trading sessions, which will make next week's G20 meeting really interesting.
All right, the clapping starts here in New York on the NASDAQ and the NYSE as we get the closing bells. A mixed bag here once again, and we talk about some of the softness, some of the drop in volume that we've seen coming off what had been a pretty euphoric rally, one of the best post-election rallies that we've had in decades. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, though, is going to settle back below that 44,000 level, though it is higher on the day by about 0.1%. We're going to call the S&P 500 unchanged. It's up about 1.5 to 59.85 and change. The NASDAQ Composite lower on the day by about 0.3%. The NASDAQ 100 down 0.2%. And when it comes to the small and mid-cap space, mid-caps down 0.5%, and the Russell 2000, Carol Massar, selling off by about 0.9%.
That's a breather after the run-up that we've seen post-election. All right, to the large caps I go, and we've got kind of an even split here. 259 names in the S&P 500 to the upside, and you've got 240 to the downside, Scarlett.
All right, let's take a look at the sector performances here. You have, let's say, 7 groups in the green. Consumer discretionary leading the way up by more than 1%. Energy and real estate investment trusts also higher on the day. Communication services, tech, and healthcare are in the red, but not by very much. The biggest decline there is 0.5%.
All right, guys, to the individual gainers. Rivian on that list up about 14% off its highs of the day when it was up more than 23%, but still about a 14% gain. The EV maker rallying after VW raised investment plans by $800 million. Analysts noting that an overhang on the stock is lifted as investors had concerns about that joint venture closing. So keep in mind, stock's still down about 46% year to date. Charter, M&A, I got to say, I did a panel this morning, and Ed Schuyler over at Citi, the expectation is that a Trump administration will be more conducive to M&A activity happening. So we did have a little bit of it today, but it's kind of a John Malone special. Charter, a top gainer in the S&P 500, up 3.6%. Charter agreeing to buy Liberty Broadband in an all-stock transaction. So this merger basically consolidating 2 public companies in which cable billionaire John Millionaire holds significant interest. It's always interesting when John Malone is involved. One more, Rocket Lab for you, up 28% at its highs, guys, up about 53% in today's session, soaring after providing a fourth quarter revenue forecast that beat estimates fueled by more Electron launches scheduled in November and December. So this is a big deal. And I got to do one more. Forgive me, I did 4. Microvast, blame Tim because he gave me this name. Microvast Holdings up 340%.
Wow.
Yeah, when something moves,
it's a micro cap. I knew you were going to give me junk about it.
Blame me.
It's an advanced battery tech company soaring. Trade was halted. No surprise there following third quarter results. Revenue beating, and the company reported third quarter adjusted earnings of 5 cents a share, beating the analyst estimates for a loss of 7 cents per share. I was gone for so long, I get to do do for
It was
today?
18 cents yesterday, and
All
today
right.
it's at 80 cents.
All right, so blame Tim. It's not me.
Yeah, but
It's not me.
it was one of the most actively traded
I'm
stocks
still on
today.
antibiotics and steroids. Like, this is what happens when you get into microcap.
You should see the roid rage from Carol Massar. Let's talk a little bit about some superlatives today, because Instacart shares falling 11%, the most ever, after the company forecast adjusted earnings in the current period that fell short of analysts' expectations. The company did post strong revenue in the third quarter, so it does see some resilience in that core grocery delivery business, but that adjusted earnings in the current period that fell short of analysts' expectations, sending shares down a record for a single day, down 11%. Speaking of shares moving lower, the most ever, Spirit Airlines ticker SAVE, those shares plunging today close to 60%. It hit the lowest intraday level on record. Bloomberg reported the company was closing in on a deal with creditors that would restructure its debt load in bankruptcy court. An agreement with creditors is expected to lead to the cancellation of the company's existing equity, Spirit said in a filing. Shares falling 60% today. And Rocket Companies shares falling today. They're the mortgage lender. They provided a fourth quarter revenue forecast that fell short of expectations. Shares falling today by just over 9%. We have seen home lenders struggle with sluggish mortgage markets as interest rates have remained elevated from those pre-pandemic levels. Rocket has this technology, though, and uses AI as a way of setting itself apart from its rivals. Still, investors disappointed to hear what they learned this week.
Let's take a quick look at where yields ended the day here. A pretty compelling story where we saw a drop on the front end of the curve, at least when it comes to that 2-year and 5-year yield. The 2-year down by about 7 basis points, that 5-year down about 2. But when you look at the longer end of the curve here, a 10-year yield up by about 4 to 5 basis points and a 30-year up about 7. You put it all together here, we actually had one of the biggest steepening of the curves that we've seen going back to at least August. I'm just going to cherry pick the 210s curve because that's what a lot of people like to look at. Right now, closing out the day right around 17. It was at 8 yesterday, and you're seeing similar parts of the curve also. Basically, a really sort of steepening twist, if you will. It'll be interesting to see exactly what the fixed income market is trying to price in here and why there's disparity going in different directions. Scarlett.
All right. Actually, we have Sono and Cisco coming out, but I'm going to go with Sonos first because that's what my producer told me to do, and I listened to her.
Mistake.
That's a dig at Romaine.
Go for Cisco. Go for Cisco.
So hold on. Let me just pull it up. Sonos, right now, hold on one second. There we go. SONO is the ticker for anyone keeping track. Fourth quarter revenue beating analyst estimates, $255.4 million, topping the consensus estimate of $247. However, it is still losing money.
Yeah.
Adjusted loss per share was 18 cents, narrower than the expected 19 cents a share.
Let's get right to Cisco here. In the most recent quarter, the company posting about $13.8 billion in revenue, a slight beat. Revenue on the product side, also a slight beat. EPS at 91 cents a share, a slight beat over what the street was looking for at 87 cents. Here's your full year forecast going forward. The company sees revenue in the fiscal year at 55.3 to 56.3 billion. It had previously seen 55 to 56. So minor tweaks here on both the top and bottom of that. And on EPS, here's your range, Carol, $3.60 to $3.66. That the low end is higher than the high end of the previous forecast that they had given.
Yeah, what's interesting now, the stock, though, after an initial pop, now down about 1/3%. So kind of interesting, looking for some commentary on what they're getting from companies in terms of demand. But, you know, as you said, I mean, some of these numbers, first quarter revenue, 13.84, that's a beat. See, second quarter adjusted EPS, 89 and 91. That is above street expectations of 87 cents. First quarter adjusted gross margin, that is better, 69.3% versus an estimate of 67.6, but street not impressed.
I mean, looking through the numbers here, and I don't want to speculate too much, but when you look at the breakdown of their units on a product basis here, you have a lot of negative signs, and the big exception, though, is security revenue, which more than doubled. Though I do believe, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, that might actually be because of an acquisition here, so that might be some of the issue, is that when you look at this, particularly on the organic side, maybe not as much growth as it appears on the surface.
We always do want to hear from Cisco about what their customers are saying. Chuck Robbins, the chair and CEO, saying, quote, "Our customers are investing in critical infrastructure to prepare for AI, and with the breadth of our portfolio, we are uniquely positioned to capitalize on this opportunity." Remember, this is a company that was involved in the first .com boom and bust, with that networking technology, so going from Web 1.0 to Web 3.0, certainly something that Cisco's trying to do.
Are we at 3.0 now?
3.0, that's where we are.
Also, we should mention that Cisco is maintaining its quarterly dividend at 40 cents a share. It's got a 2.7% dividend yield, which among big tech companies is pretty high up there.
Got to say, the stock's up 16% year to date, so it has, been on an upswing, but maybe investors just saying it's just not enough. So we'll look for some more commentary, certainly on the call with analysts. All right, guys, that's a wrap. Our cross-platform radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. We do it all. We will see you again, same time, same place tomorrow for the closing bell.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
Hey, Carol, don't know if you saw this yesterday, but Stanley Black & Decker, they made Craftsman and DeWalt. They warned of raising prices.
I have a few. I've used a few.
Well, they warned that those prices could go up in response to higher tariffs that it expects to be imposed by President-elect Donald Trump's administration. I put this out on the X platform yesterday, and some people responded, hey, just make this stuff in the U.S. That's the whole idea of these tariffs. But if you go further down into the article by our Bloomberg News team, they wrote that the company's CEO said it's unlikely we're moving a lot back to the U.S. because it's just not cost-effective to do so. There's questions about whether we even have the labor to actually do that in this country.
Especially, too, some would say that we're going to push back on immigrants and immigration, and that is going to really squeeze the workforce even more. So there's a lot to think about here, Tim.
Yeah, no question a lot of executives are thinking about what their supply chains are going to look like, given what Trump has said about tariffs on the campaign trail and what he did in the first administration. For more on that, we go to Nazak Nikhatar, partner and chair of the National Security Law Practice at the law firm Wiley Rain, where she specializes in international trade and national security. Also an economist and former assistant secretary and undersecretary at the Department of Commerce under President Trump from 2018 to 2021. She joins us from Washington, D.C. Nazak, good to have you with us. I want to talk trade because you've been in close touch with Trump's transition team, Robert Lighthizer, who was U.S. trade representative in the first Trump administration. We're going to talk about trade and tariffs in just a second, but we're getting so much news about potential appointees and actual people who have been tapped that I just want you to weigh in on what it looks like to have Attorney General Matt Gaetz, for example, be tapped by the former president, the president-elect, to serve as Attorney General. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't want to sort of speculate in terms of, and it's very, very good to be with you. I don't want to speculate in terms of what the political appointments mean generally for very specific policies, but the trend that's really important to see is that the political appointments are aligning with President Trump's campaign promises, right? Much more forward-leaning policies to deal with the threats that we're seeing in terms of the economic and national security threats. So I am personally pleased to see, delivering on those promises to take on some of these big issues that you're talking about.
It does seem like the one thread that sort of ties all these names together is loyalty to the former president and the president-elect. And I'm wondering what you make of that. Much has been made of the whole idea of having a, quote, team of rivals like we've seen in past administrations. What do you make of what the president-elect is doing now, tapping people who've defended him vigorously on TV over the last 4 years?
And it's an excellent question because it really underscores a very key point. A really effective administration is going to have cabinet members who are like-minded and are rowing in the same direction. We've seen too many times cabinet members who are constantly in disagreement, and that impedes progress. China is a big elephant in the room. China is the national security threat of our time. It is the big rival. And time is running out. We see what China's doing in the Indo-Pacific. We really need an administration who has like-minded cabinet members who are going to work and advance policies in unison.
But tell us about, since you've been on the inside and you understand kind of how things work, many would argue it's great to have a leader, but it's also good to have, key advisors around him that don't all just say yes, but they also challenge. So are we not going, I'm assuming you had some of that there when you were there. Are we not going to have that this time around?
Absolutely. We're obviously going to see that. I think the important thing is that we have cabinet members who are all in agreement of what the threat is. But every single individual is going to have a different opinion and how to counter the threats. And so it's really important to have different opinions, and that makes for better policies. But we just don't want to be in a situation where the cabinet members are not like-minded in terms of the threat that we really have to counter, which is China.
Okay, let's talk about that a little bit, because the company ByteDance, it's the parent company of TikTok. And in the first Trump administration, he signed an executive order that would have banned TikTok. The Washington Post, though, reporting this week that the president-elect may halt a potential ban. It's a campaign promise that he had. He wanted to save the app. He even had a presence on it. In your view, should TikTok be banned?
I think there's enough information out there that TikTok, through its surveillance capabilities, et cetera, is posing a significant national security threat. In fact, Europe, countries in Europe have made findings about how TikTok is ByteDance misusing children's information. That said, it's really important to underscore also that there are so many Chinese companies that are in our infrastructure, telecommunications companies with the surveillance, software, hardware, et cetera, that focusing just on one company is moving our eye away from what really we need to focus on, which is the big threats to U.S. infrastructure.
That is a company, though, that has the attention of millions of young people here in the U.S., and it has the ability to influence the way that they view certain things. So I think that is a unique company to be talking about. We can talk about some of the other ones. So are you saying that it shouldn't be banned because there's too many companies that have a presence in our lives in terms of companies that are from China?
Look, I think the best way to assess this is, Director Wray did a great job in terms of going back to Congress over and over again in terms of providing assessments on the national security threat. And I actually think Congress ended up exactly where they need to be in terms of, the proposed ban on TikTok. Once the president and his cabinet members are certainly in the office, I think that they're going to look at classified information and make the right decision. But based on the information that exists today, I believe that there are national security threats that TikTok, ByteDance pose, and I do think that Congress, based on the information from the U.S. intelligence community, landed on the right outcome.
I think a lot about global supply chains. Tim kicked it off talking about the Stanley Black & Decker CEO about the inability not to be able to make his products here in the United States. Won't maybe have the labor. It's not going to be cost effective. How concerned are you, about these pending tariffs from a Trump administration and the implications it will have on American companies?
Look, the reality is that we're not going to be able to make everything we need to in the United States. But I think the U.S. government is correct in focusing on the things that are critical to the defense industrial base and the broader industrial base that spill over into the defense industrial base. Those things we really need to have, whether in the United States or in close proximity to the United States, in case there's an emergency, and we need access to those supply chains. At the same time, I often hear the fact that, tariffs are going to make things more expensive, right? Sometimes they do. Sometimes, in fact, China tends to absorb a lot of the tariffs that are placed on it because it just doesn't want to displace itself from the U.S. market. I think both things are true, just depending on the item, the good, and the tariffs that are imposed. But at the end of the day, tariffs are intended, the laws that permit the imposition of tariffs are intended to provide price corrections. So it's not just is something more expensive than it was yesterday, is sometimes it becoming more expensive is fixing the price distortion. And that then translates to companies making more money, higher wages, et cetera, when they're actually able to compete, get back into the marketplace and not be displaced from Chinese goods that are 40% of the price that they're offering, right? And it's not just because China is more competitive. This is the function of Chinese industrial subsidies and a range of Chinese policies that underprice.
Nazak, so then are you saying, because initially, the president-elect has vowed 20% on all foreign goods and 60% or higher on goods coming from China. Are you saying in the end, and only got about 30 seconds, that he will be much more selective in terms of what tariffs are being placed? Just quickly.
I think there's two classes of products. When the Chinese distortions have affected the global economy, I think that there's going to be a case for tariffs on a broad range of goods from different countries. But I think on the bilateral side, the underpricing is so severe from China that we're going to see much more significant tariffs on imports directly from China.
Any chance you're going to be serving again in the Trump administration? Just quickly.
I have not been officially asked, but I'm always happy to do whatever I can to advance the interests of the United States.
So if asked, you'd say yes.
We will see.
Okay, we'll come back to you, and we hope you'll come back to us. Really appreciate it. Nazak Nakatar, she is partner and chair of the National Security Law practice at the law firm Wiley Ryan, former assistant secretary and undersecretary at the Department of Commerce.
Yeah, she did that under President Trump from 2018 to 2021.
It's 421 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg, getting earnings from Cisco Systems. It is the biggest maker of networking equipment, and it gave a strong revenue forecast for the current period, signaling an uptick in corporate spending on computer infrastructure. Turned out to be a mixed day for the U.S. stock market, with the Dow, the S&P, both a little change today. NASDAQ ended the day lower. We had NASDAQ down 50, a drop there of 0.3%. S&P up a point, ending the session, 59.85 below 6,000. Little change there. The Dow up 47, up by 0.1%. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares down 0.9%. The 10-year 4.44%, with the 2-year 4.27%. Spot gold down $22 the ounce to $25.75, a drop today of 0.9%. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.2%, $67.99 a barrel. Bitcoin 88,393 right now on Bitcoin. Numerous reports now say Governor Kathy Hochul is expected to unpause New York City's congestion pricing tomorrow with an announcement about a lower base toll. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thanks so much for that update. Really do appreciate it. Another day, another new record for Bitcoin. I said 92,000 in the T's, excuse me, 93,000 is what it climbed above for the first time ever.
It just goes higher and higher and higher.
Traders are still assessing the remaining market impact of President-elect Donald Trump's rhetorical support for crypto. We'll see if that strategic Bitcoin reserve ever materializes in 2025 and beyond. So just how high can Bitcoin go? Michael Novogratz, the billionaire head of the crypto investment firm Galaxy Digital, weighed in earlier on Bloomberg TV.
I don't necessarily think the dollar needs anything to back it up. To need to back up the reserve currency is counterintuitive. And so, again, listen, if we get the Bitcoin reserve, and as a guy that owns a lot of Bitcoin, I will not cry. And if you see me crying, there'll be crocodile tears. I think Bitcoin heads to 500,000.
Okay, 500,000 is what Michael Novogratz says. I talked to Kathy Wood last week, Carol. She maintains $1 million per Bitcoin by the year 2030. They're still going with the bull case, though?
6 years from now.
6 years from now. Wow. Let's see what Adam Sullivan has to say. He's CEO of the AI infrastructure and digital asset mining company Core Scientific. He joins us from Dallas, Texas. Adam, good to have you back with us. Always good to check in with you. Just remind everybody where Core Scientific sits right now when it comes to the crypto space, when it comes to the mining space, because you're also going big on AI servers.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on. Core Scientific, we've been the largest Bitcoin mining company for the past 3 years. So we've been very dedicated to this space. And, as you mentioned, we're also building out one of the largest AI footprints across the United States as well. So we sit kind of in the cornerstone of two of the most talked about industries right now in the world.
Are you still focused as much on Bitcoin as you were since you have pivoted somewhat to AI infrastructure?
Yeah, we're pivoting some of our sites, but we're still maintaining a significant presence in the Bitcoin mining industry. We're still one of the largest miners in the industry today. And so we believe in the future of Bitcoin, and that's where we're going to continue to invest capital in going forward.
Given where Bitcoin is today, 93,000 is what it hit today, was it a mistake to pivot any of your facilities?
Absolutely not. When you think about AI and the contracts that we're signing 12-year deals with 2 5-year extensions. That's locked in revenue that is above even some of the best mining economics we've had over the past 5 years. So we feel very confident that this is going to provide us an advantage where we're going to be able to make counter-cyclical investments in the mining industry, given we have these long-term stable contracts and lower our cost of capital.
Hey, Adam, so what's going to be the split realistically longer term? How do you see your business evolving between mining and hosting? Let's talk top line revenue.
Top line revenue, AI is going to continue to push as a higher percentage over the next few years because Bitcoin mining is going through kind of another renaissance period of where those facilities are going. Bitcoin mining is moving to smaller sites. You're finding economies of scale in the number of sites you operate, not just the large, having a larger site. So that's really what we're seeing, and that's what we're pushing towards. And so that's going to cause an economic split here where our AI sites are built for hyperscalers. They're massive sites, very large revenue numbers. We've already contracted for $8.7 billion this year. Those are numbers that trump what you can achieve in the Bitcoin mining industry without gobbling up too much of the network.
Let me ask you something. Are you hedging your bets if this Bitcoin thing doesn't quite ultimately longer term play out as maybe everybody expects, and you think the AI is a surer bet?
I would say quite the opposite. Really, what we're really good at is building large-scale digital infrastructure. Our team is unique in the Bitcoin mining industry. We were a data center first team that came in to build Bitcoin mining. We became the largest Bitcoin miner very quickly. And now we're just utilizing that team, our power infrastructure, for its highest value use cases. And so we're not hedging any bets. In fact, we are still dedicated to both Bitcoin mining and artificial intelligence and high-performance computing moving forward.
But it was a company that did have to declare bankruptcy back in December of 2022, so almost 2 years ago. That was when the crypto market crashed. Energy prices were really elevated. You saw a liquidity crunch. Liabilities and assets on the balance sheet were more or less the same. Look, I know you have been moving in a different direction now that the company is relisted and it's back. But what can we learn from that?
Yeah, there's a number of things. One, don't take on short-dated debt if you are in a volatile industry. Bitcoin mining is volatile, and if you go through an extended period of time with a downturn, that's what can cause issues for a company with a lot of short-dated debt on the balance sheet. The one thing you have to remember about Core Scientific, though, is we had the most successful emergence from an equity perspective out of any Chapter 11 case. And in the first 12 months post-emergence, we're one of the most successful emergences from Chapter 11 in history. So we've definitely done right by our equity holders over the past 2 years, even though we did have to go through that Chapter 11 process. And so it was a capital structure issue that's fully been fixed. And now looking forward, we have great growth prospects ahead of us.
How much does a new Trump administration impact your growth prospects on the crypto side?
Yeah, I mean, think about his, 3 of his top priorities that are really speaking to us at Core Scientific, which is he's Bitcoin forward. He wants to push additional energy dominance in the United States. And he wants to have all of the artificial intelligence that U.S. companies are using actually done in the United States. So these are all things, all 3 of those priorities, are really hallmarks for us in terms of what speaks to us for the future of our company. And that's just going to mean that we're going to have better growth prospects. U.S. companies are going to be looking to build more infrastructure in the United States. And it's going to allow more energy to come onto the U.S. grid, which is critical for everyone in the United States, regardless of whether you're a high energy consumer or not.
It's something we, I think heard in the soundbite that we just played with Michael Novogratz, but or just expectations. But this idea, part of Donald Trump, he has talked about creating this national Bitcoin reserve. I don't know, how are you thinking about that? How is that possible? How likely is that?
I would put the percentages rather low at something like that occurring, but like Novogratz, I would fully support it. As a Bitcoiner myself, I would be pretty excited about something like that. But it's really hard to know. When you look at the U.S. government buying Bitcoin, that is a pretty major step for the U.S. government to undertake. We're seeing it from some other governments, but they are not the U.S. government. They're not the world power of the United States.
Okay, so it raises the fundamental question that I have. What would be the point of the U.S. government buying Bitcoin? What would be the point of a strategic Bitcoin reserve in the U.S.?
Is that my tax dollars going towards that? But that's an aside. Go ahead. Answer Tim's question.
Yeah, I think, when you look at other countries right now, there are a lot of other countries that are putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And there's a lot of...
They're not the largest economies in the world.
But you think about China, you think about Russia. I mean, they are much more Bitcoin forward than most people understand. I mean, I would estimate...
Why would you say that about China? China has some really strict regulations when it comes to cryptocurrency mining.
I would say probably 20% of the entire Bitcoin network still operates out of China.
Wow.
From a mining perspective. And so that is a lot of local municipalities in China still allowing Bitcoin mining to occur. If you think about the amount of energy generation that they've developed over the past few years, especially think about renewables, that most of that power is going to get dumped into the ground for an extended period of time. It could be 10 years, it could be 20 years. And so they're looking at ways to monetize that, and they are 100% monetizing that, at least in part, through Bitcoin mining.
But still, what's the point here in the U.S. of buying Bitcoin for the U.S. government to do it, to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve?
Yeah, how is that important to maybe our national security, or I don't know?
I think it's a hedge against their own Federal Reserve, right? And so when you think about the U.S. government putting Bitcoin on balance sheet, it's putting a stake in the ground that they believe in the future of Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin has a future on a global stage amongst governments, which I think is probably one of the first times this has ever been talked about in history for Bitcoin.
I wonder, though, if that bites the U.S., Carol, because you're essentially saying, okay, our treasuries are backed with the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, but if the U.S. then starts to buy Bitcoin,
then what's the faith behind as a hedge?
As a hedge against its own currency, then does that affect the full faith and credit of the U.S.?
Right. Does that make that not as important? Which would go for an argument against doing this. I don't know. I mean, we're living in interesting times. Hey, I am curious, Adam, about your outreach. you and your team at Core Scientific when it comes to either lobbying Donald Trump or whether it's reaching out to Howard Lutnick. I'm just giving an idea of efforts that you guys are doing on your behalf.
Yeah, prior to the election, we were speaking to both sides of the aisle. As we look towards the new administration, we are in constant dialogue across not only the federal level, but also the local, state level, and community level as well, as we've seen a number of changes across some of the jurisdictions that we operate in. So, it requires constant communication because we don't know all the rules or potential regulations that are coming down the pipeline. We don't know what's going to be relaxed. And so that requires a lot of dialogue and hopefully, them taking some of our input about what will drive more job growth, what will drive more adoption of data centers, Bitcoin mining facilities across the United States.
Hey, one other thing that I think about, like as your universe kind of evolves and with the hosting, energy policy, you've got to be watching it, right? In terms of, we know AI and servers or hosting AI, it just eats more and more power. What are your expectations around that? What kind of assistance or policy changes are you hoping on that front?
Yeah, I would say it's more firm generation power being brought into the grid. And so that is across nuclear, that's across natural gas, that's across all of the firm generation power that actually creates a more stable grid. Those are critical to not reducing brownouts, reducing blackouts.
Can you explain that? We only have about a minute left, but I think I don't get that. I'll be honest. How does that make a more stable grid?
So renewable power, so let's take wind, for example. At the highest rate, it can run at about 45% capacity factor, meaning 45% of the day it operates. Solar is about 35%. And so as we've taken off firm generation power off the grid and replaced it with renewables, that's the reason why you're seeing a lot more brownouts across the United States in areas that have high proliferation of renewable energy. So bringing more firm generation power onto the grid reduces that volatility of when capacity is actually available, because supply is pretty constant. It changes throughout the day. It's high in the morning, it's high in the afternoon, but that's not necessarily when the wind is blowing or the sun is shining. And so that's what creates the instability across the U.S. grid.
Really fascinating stuff. Always good to check in with you, Adam. When we spoke a few months ago, I had no idea Bitcoin was going to be going to 93,000.
I don't think most people did.
We'll see what it is when we check in with you.
It can move around
in a few months.
bit.
Your prediction, higher or lower if we speak to you in 3 months?
I feel like we're going to be a bit higher than today.
A bit higher than today. All right.
Adam, thank you so much. Be well. Adam Sullivan, he's CEO of the AI infrastructure and digital asset mining company, Core Scientific, joining us on this Wednesday from Dallas, Texas.
Hey, coming up next, we check in with our congressional reporter about everything in D.C.
It's 4:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Cisco Systems, the biggest maker of computer networking equipment, out with a strong revenue forecast for the current period, signaling an uptick in corporate spending on computer infrastructure. After hours, we got Cisco lower now by about 0.4%. CEO Chuck Robbins attributes the growth in part to spending on artificial intelligence. Turned out to be a mixed day for the stock market. Yes, an update barely for the S&P 500 index. No record today, 59.85. Little change there. The Dow up 47, up by 0.1%. NASDAQ down 50, a decline of 0.3%. 10-year CPI Thursday with the 10-year 4.44%, the 2-year 4.27%. Spot gold down $23 the ounce, down 0.9%, while West Texas Intermediate crude 68.04 a barrel on WTI. Bitcoin right now 89,388. Briefly today, Bitcoin did trade above $93,000. So what about the market backdrop given the election? Doug Sioka is CEO at Kavar Capital. He was a guest right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
Look, the momentum that's in place that's celebrating what is purported to be very much a free trade emphasizing low regulation, low tax platform, it likely will be hard to stop that going into year end, which is seasonally pretty strong anyway. But I do think there are going to be a lot of opportunities that emerge without question.
Doug Sioka of Kavar Capital, interviewed right here on a Bloomberg Business Week. Recapping stocks end of the day mix. The S&P little changed at 59.85, up by 1 point. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. So key to what President-elect Donald Trump gets done in terms of his agenda really kind of lies at the doorstep of the U.S. Justice Department. The department sits at the apex of the machinery that Mr. Trump will need to carry out his agenda, from enforcing federal laws to litigating controversial matters. It also plays a key role in doling out billions of dollars in grant funding for immigration enforcement, border security, and policing, excuse me. So it really is an important part of his process, or necessary part of his process.
Well, on that, President-elect Donald Trump says he's nominating Matt Gaetz of Florida to be Attorney General, tapping a polarizing lawmaker to reshape U.S. law enforcement and carry out his agenda on immigration, crime, and hot-button social issues. We've got with us Stephen Dennis. He's Bloomberg News congressional reporter, joins us from Capitol Hill. Stephen, I think it's fair to say many would call this a shocking pick. What's the reaction on the Hill that you've heard in the last hour?
Yeah, we're hearing shock from moderate senators like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, who just thought this was completely unexpected. Susan Collins noted to me that he's under investigation by the House Ethics Committee, and she said, look, this is why it's important to have the Senate process, and she noted he'll be expected to complete an FBI background check. He's going to be asked a lot of questions at hearings. Lisa Murkowski told me she didn't think this was a serious pick. So I think it's going to be pretty hard for him to actually get the 50 votes that he needs, plus the vice president, to be confirmed. The rule of 4 is what we're going to hear a lot over the next year or two to confirm any of Trump's controversial picks. If all the Democrats line up against them, then if 4 Senate Republicans also defect, then the pick would go down. But then you have this other issue of Trump wanting to do recess appointments. And so I think it's, this is the kind of pick that might need a recess appointment to get in office.
Well, okay, so you said, and forgive me, you said Lisa Murkowski said this was a shock, that this was she doesn't think this would get through?
Lisa Murkowski told me she did not consider this to be a serious pick. Now, she didn't say she would vote no, but she kind of was strongly hinting that. And other Republicans simply didn't even want to talk about it. They let the elevator doors shut. Lindsey Graham said a lot will matter. His confirmation hearing would matter a lot. But you can expect no Democrats are going to support this pick. So this is going to be down to a lot of moderate Republicans who are initially shocked and not really keen on putting Matt Gaetz in charge. And I think one of the things he's going to have to deal with is this House ethics investigation. He's had a lot of accusations against him over his private life, and I think that's the kind of thing that he's going to have to clear up in these hearings.
So, Stephen, while you were talking, Tim's basically mouthing to me, so why do it? Why nominate him? Is this just Trump putting people out there? I keep thinking about this horse trading idea of like, I'm going to put a bunch of people out there. I know I'm not going to get everybody, but that's going to be part of the process so I get some people I really, really want.
Well, it is definitely a pick that is his base really likes this pick. They want to smash the deep state and go after the FBI and go after the people who were investigating President Trump. And so from that perspective, it's good for Trump's base. But you also have to remember Trump's base is not necessarily happy with another pick from today around the same time, which is Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. There are some folks in the president's base who don't like that pick. So he's making both of these picks at roughly the same time, pleasing different parts of the Republican coalition. I did talk to Rubio, who says, look, the president won by a significant majority, and that suggests there's a big tent in the Republican Party. So, people like Marco Rubio are going to have to get along with people like Matt Gaetz and Tulsi Gabbard, who's going to be a very controversial pick at the Director of National Intelligence. And, she's somebody who called Rubio a neocon warmonger, a few months ago. Rubio has told me that he feels like they have a pretty good relationship now, and, they're going to work together. So we'll see. I mean, it's sort of like a team of rivals kind of cabinet so far. And we'll see how that
rivals in the sense
out.
that rivals in what sense? Not rivals in the sense of
ideological rivals.
Okay.
Marco Rubio hails from, originally he was sort of an ally of John McCain. He supported the Gang of Eight immigration bill that Trump fans hated back in 2013. And so I think there's going to be, this is Trump sort of giving each wing of the party a significant cabinet pick. Now, maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. We'll have to see how the Senate responds to this and whether they confirm them, deny them, or whether Trump weighs on the new leader, John Thune, to recess the Senate so that he can install Gaetz and others at least temporarily. And that's going to be a big question going into next year.
How do you see John Thune kind of reigning over the Senate? He's a longtime deputy of Mitch McConnell, advocate of free trade. I'm just curious, from your understanding of him, knowledge of him, reporting on him, how do you see him overseeing the Senate and the process?
I think he's a really affable guy. He's got great relationships with both sides of the aisle. And the question for him has always been whether he can keep on board the more conservative, more Trumpist wing of the party who mostly got behind Rick Scott here on the first ballot. And that's going to be a challenge. I mean, the Senate, he said today he's going to keep the filibuster rule, which requires 60 votes for most legislation. That usually very quickly frustrates a majority. The other thing that's going to be an obsession here for us and for Washington in the coming months is this reconciliation budget package that can include a lot of spending items as well as a lot of tax cuts. And they need to extend Trump's tax cuts that are expiring from 2017. That's trillions of dollars. That's going to be an obsession of everybody here. And that is going to be a real challenge, because you can only lose 4 in the Senate, and the House majority is going to be very, very small as well. And so that's just going to be a big challenge, but there's also a lot of things people want in that bill, and maybe that brings them together. I mean, we did see in 2017 their efforts to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act really divided Republicans, was really unpopular with the public, and John McCain ultimately did a thumbs down. I think it's going to be a real challenge for them to stick together. But right now, there's sort of a honeymoon period. Nobody wants to say anything bad about Trump. And to the extent that they think that, they're mostly letting the elevator doors close rather than giving us juicy quotes.
Yeah, I mean, you see what happens to people who oppose Trump.
When that honeymoon is over.
Well, I don't know. I mean, this is the Republican Party now. If you oppose Trump, you don't necessarily have a big future in the Republican Party.
Yeah, but the reality can always be different from kind of the expectations. Stephen Dennis, thank you so much. Bloomberg News congressional reporter joining us there from up on the Hill. You're listening and watching Bloomberg.
listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. What would you like to hear about on Bloomberg Radio?
More Tim and Carol.
More crypto? That's what somebody got in touch with me on Twitter and said. Said more crypto.
Somebody said to me, more perspectives.
Okay. We got some today.
Coming off the election, America's voted. Yeah, we did get a lot of different perspectives.
Well, help make shows like ours even better. Give us our feedback. Take the Bloomberg Audience Survey. Visit youtube.com/Bloomberg Podcast. Click the link in our profile or community section. It'll take you to the survey. It's hosted by our partners over at Material. Fill it out now at youtube.com/Bloomberg Podcast.
So you want to take a look at some of the most read stories on the Bloomberg? All right.
Did you see the FBI one? Elizabeth put it in the chat.
Let me take a look
Polymarket.
here.
This is a very interesting story.
All right, let's go through that story. Thank you, Elizabeth. FBI seizing Polymarket CEO Shane Kaplan's phone and electronics just a week after the election betting platform successfully predicted President-elect Donald Trump's win. This is coming from the New York Post. They cited an unidentified person familiar with the matter. Kaplan was not provided any reason for the incident, the person told the Post. Polymarket, a spokesperson telling the Post, Polymarket is a fully transparent prediction market that helps everyday people better understand the events that matter most to them, including elections.
So
this is okay.
Okay, so I'm going to the New York Post
too much
story,
into this. Yeah,
but there's some details. He was roused from his bed in Soho at 6 a.m. by U.S. law enforcement who demanded he turn over his phone and other electronic devices. A source close to the matter told the New York Post.
Is that what they usually do? Like they hit you while you're like not awake, haven't had coffee? Is that what happens?
I don't know. I don't know.
I feel like there's a lot more to be known. The source telling the Post it's grand political theater at its worst. They could have asked his lawyer for any of these things. Instead, they staged a so-called raid so they can leak it to the media and use it for obvious political reasons. Who's they?
I don't know.
Kaplan was not provided with a reason for the raid. Again, we're reading from the New York Post, but the source suspects it was political retribution since Polymarket accurately predicted an easy Trump triumph over Vice President Kamala Harris as opposed to traditional polls.
Again, coming from the New York Post.
So what is this, like other polling people?
I don't know. The pollsters are angry because the betting sites.
But they got the FBI
the prediction
involved.
markets.
But
excuse me, not the betting sites. The
but
prediction
the FBI
markets.
FBI did this.
I only know what I'm reading here.
I know.
Hey, we're still getting lots of names coming from the Trump administration, the transition team, about who has been picked.
Yeah.
Marco Rubio has been tapped to serve as Secretary of State.
Or Stephen Dennis said that was considered a bit controversial. Not everybody's among the GOP on board.
There's some policies that he has, some positions that he has that aren't necessarily in line with the hardcore Trump fan base. We also got the Attorney General pick of Matt Gaetz, representative from Florida, that has, according to Stephen Dennis, surprised many on Capitol Hill. He just joined us, our congressional reporter on Capitol Hill, speaking with lawmakers about that pick. And then there's the Fox News weekend host Pete Hegseth as defense secretary that has put the world's most powerful military in the hands of the least experienced leader it's had in decades.
Yeah, kind of interesting. And our second most read story in the Bloomberg goes to the South Dakota Senator John Thune being chosen to take over for Mitch McConnell. And what's interesting is the story says it rejects Elon Musk's pick. So we've talked about the influence of Elon Musk, certainly in the lead up to the election and post the election, now being part of this efficiency office, if you will, at the U.S. government as in kind of an advisory role, right? But it's interesting to see that while there are people who are very close to the president-elect, it doesn't mean he's necessarily going to follow the advice from all of those individuals, even if you give him $130 million.
There's something that we learned in the last Trump administration. It's he makes his own decisions.
Absolutely.
Hey, another one of the most read stories in the last 8 hours. This one has nothing to do with the new administration.
You're going to go there.
It's a little closer to home. Oh, I'm going there, Carol
Tim has been
Nasser.
like, Carol, we have to talk about it. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to talk about it. Go ahead.
The New York City Council has voted to end killer broker fees squeezing renters. I told Carol
Sounds like
we got to do
you've been
this
there.
story.
Have you been there?
Raise your hand in the control room if you've been there with some killer broker fees. Everybody's raising their hand. Oh, yeah.
Really?
Okay, so here's how it works. And we have to explain this because this doesn't happen in other cities around the U.S. and the world. So as much as 15% of annual rent come in fees. They're often paid by the tenant before moving in. That's on top of a security deposit. So it's first month's rent, last month's rent, and then the broker's fee. So under the new measure,
you pay the selling broker?
you pay
Your broker.
Well, it's not selling; it's the leasing broker. Yeah,
the leasing broker.
Yeah, so it's the broker that helps you. I put helps in quotes because you're the one doing all the work finding this place. They're not helping you. All they're doing is.
Don't they give you listings and help you?
No, they don't give you
Don't
listings.
they give you the keys
They
to
just give
open
you the keys. Then maybe they'll meet you there and show you the place, and you like it, you jump on it. Bam! Immediately, 15%.
Oppositional.
Under the measure, real estate agents who exclusively represent the landlord's interest wouldn't be able to seek a fee from the person who's signing the lease. Sometimes you get these no-fee apartments too, but then the fee's actually just baked in.
Yeah.
Because what they do is the no-fee ones are paid by the person who owns the property.
Oh, right.
So that's who pays the fee. So they end up just raising the rent as a result.
All right, so I guess this bill now goes to Mayor Eric Adams for a signature. If he stalls, it becomes law after 30 days. If he vetoes the measure, it goes back to the council. Based on the number of votes in favor, the council would be expected to override a veto and the bill would become law. So next time you have to rent an apartment, you are in like Flynn.
You just gotta, it doesn't, maybe it makes it a little more affordable, but they'll get you another way. It's New York City.
Love this city. I do.
I do too. A lot of people do, and that's why.
It's a little smoky though today.
It is that
We noticed
wildfire
that.
smoke.
So take care, everybody. Be careful.
Carol, it's good to have you back. How do you feel?
That's what's kicking up my voice a little bit.
How do you feel?
I feel